percentage of products that are fallen under according to the White House versus how we would characterize it. So that still needs to be clarified. We also know that provincially, at least, the retaliation plans, at least in Ontario, go ahead even with this pause. Doug Ford saying until the threat is removed entirely, he is not going to back away from his decision to impose a 25% surcharge on electricity going to the States from Ontario. You had heard from the Premier Eby in BC also talking about that the threat itself is a problem. But we don't know federally what, from the Prime Minister's office yet, what might have been agreed to on the retaliatory tariffs from the federal. So we're waiting for that to see whether there's been any give on that or what goes ahead or whether there's a pause in those as well.
Yeah, that's interesting, Karina, right? Because now that the pause is there, is this still full steam ahead? It sounds like it from Doug Ford, and it sounds like it from the Premier of British Columbia, David Eby, that this can't be kind of hanging over our head, that we're just constantly, I think Melanie Joly described it as a psychodrama. Then we also heard Justin Trudeau, he was asked, what do you think of that? And he said, he described it as Thursday. But, you know, that kidding aside, that this is just something that is wreaking havoc with the Canadian economy, and it's making Canadians angry and anxious.
And we're still waiting to hear, well, we're not waiting to hear. At this point, Donald Trump has said that the aluminum and steel tariffs planned for next week still go into effect, at the reciprocal tariffs April 2nd. And will those reciprocal tariffs, do they include their calculation of the GST? You know, there's still a lot of questions. And so I think Lord Austin was correct.
Yeah.
Like, Canada has to use this time to figure out how it proceeds going forward.
And Karina, I want to let our viewers know, stay there. But what has happened now is I can see it. I've got a monitor over here, and I can see you. I can see a couple of other things. And what we have is
I see it too.
Yeah, I think the tape is almost ready for us to play back of Donald Trump and what he had to say. Is it ready? Yeah, let's go. Donald Trump.
Okay.
President of Mexico, wonderful woman today, and we helped them out with the problem they were having to do with the tariffs, short-term tariffs, and we had a very good conversation. Also, we discussed drugs, and they were working much harder lately. Do you notice that? On people coming in and drugs, and we've made tremendous progress on both.
President Trump, what's your thought about why the markets are so spooked? Do you think they don't like the tariffs, or do they not like the uncertainty with some of the changes and the carve-outs?
Well, a lot of them are globalist countries and companies that won't be doing as well because we're taking back things that have been taken from us many years ago. We've been treated very unfairly as a country. We protect everybody. We do everything for all these countries. And a lot of these are globalist in nature. You know, they have, if you're outside of the United States, you know, it's going to be a little bit different. We just weren't treated right. We were ripped off as a country. I've been saying it for a long time. And I did it to a certain extent in the first administration, but with COVID coming in, we had to focus on that toward the end. But we had the greatest economy in history in the first administration, and I think we'll do even better now. But this is something that we have to do. There'll always be a little short-term interruption. I don't think it's going to be big, but the countries and companies that have been ripping us aren't particularly happy with what I'm doing. But the United States will be very happy. And, you know, our farmers are going to be very happy. And, again, there'll be disruption. But in the end, I said it before with China, we signed an unbelievable deal with China, $50 billion in purchases, and we're doing great. Biden, however, when he came in, they never enforced that deal. So that's the only thing that basically you have globalist companies that have been ripping us off that won't be able to rip us off any longer. I think that's what the big charge is.
Have you been influenced, some of these exemptions that have been announced and some of these temporary delays, have you been influenced in those decisions because of the market reaction?
Well, there are no delays at all. No, nothing to do with the market. I'm not even looking at the market because long term, the United States will be very strong with what's happening here. Now, these are countries and companies, foreign companies that have been ripping us off, and no president did anything about it until I came along, and then I did a lot about it. You know, we took in tariffs from China $600 billion. Nobody else took in 10 cents from China. They never did. But when COVID came along, we had to focus on COVID. We did a great job. We got rid of that. We ended up handing over with a market that was higher than it was previous to COVID coming in. But this is very much about companies and countries that have ripped off this country, our beloved USA, and they're not going to be ripping us off anymore. So, you know, I think that has an impact on the market.
Mr. President. Sir, this is a slate of nominees that's been prepared by the Presidential Personnel Office. It includes a number of sub-cabinet level appointments, a number of your ambassadors that have been previously announced, and also, crucially, given the administration's concerted effort to focus on violent crime, it includes a number of U.S. attorneys in major cities that have real crime problems.
Okay. Some very good people, too.
Thank you, sir. And then we have a number of ceremonial proclamations that Lindsay Halligan is going to.
So 2 very special proclamations, the first of which is a proclamation that proclaims March 2025 as Women's History Month in honor of all the wonderful women in your administration, all the wonderful women in America, and in honor of everything you've done for women and this administration has done for women in just, what, a month and a half? So.
Yeah, we've done a lot, and women have done a lot for us, right? This is an honor. We have a wonderful woman here, Maria Bartiromo.
Thank you so much.
Nice to have you, Maria.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thanks for all that you're doing for women.
Thank you. She's going to do an interview of me later. Maybe I shouldn't do this interview. I should be like Biden, not do any interviews. That's great. Women, we love you.
We love you too, sir.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Lindsay.
So the second one is a proclamation proclaiming March 2025 as Irish American Heritage Month in honor of, well, to commemorate our amazing friendship between America and Ireland, and to just honor all of the Irish Americans. And I'm a little bit biased because I'm American and Irish, but
Good. Yeah, well, great people. Yeah, great
St.
people.
Patrick's Day is coming up as well.
And they voted for me in heavy numbers, so I like them even now. You have to like it. You know, you're not supposed to, but you have to like that. All right. So for the Irish American people, proclamation. Okay. Thanks, Lindsay.
Mr. President, your envoy, Steve Witkoff, told us a little while ago that if Hamas does not release hostages, that the U.S. and Israel could take some action. What does that mean in your eyes? Is that military action? Would you join strikes with
When are
Israel?
you going to find out? I had the honor of spending a lot of time yesterday with quite a few of the people that we got out, and I can't believe how badly treated they were, really badly treated. Stories that you wouldn't even believe. Some of it was documented, some of it was so bad you couldn't really, I don't think you can put it on. And it's a shame. And they said one thing, that they have 59 hostages, of which many of them are killed. And they want to know if we could just continue. They said without us, look, Biden wasn't able to get anybody out. We came along and they started releasing. But we have 59 left, of which 24 are living. The rest are dead. And I put out a statement. It's sort of self-explanatory, I think. But somebody's going to have to get a lot rougher than they're getting. It's a shame. And those 24 that are living, because they were with them just 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, depending on when they got out. But they said they're in very bad shape.
You spoke today with your cabinet members and Elon Musk.
I did.
What did you tell them in regards to Elon Musk and his authorities to carry out actions?
We had a great meeting. We had Elon and we had some of the representatives for the business reps. We also had most of the cabinet members. Not all of them It doesn't really pertain to all of them, but many of them. And I thought it was a really good meeting. It was about cutting because we have, everybody knows the country's way out of control in terms of the number of people. We have many people that don't work. We have many people probably that aren't even living that are getting checks. And we're finding all of that out, and it's being reported. We're going to save hundreds of billions of dollars. We've already saved a lot. And parts of it are contracts that are expired that we're paying on. Many crazy things that, you know, you can see it happening. It shouldn't happen, but you can see it happening. You see a lot of it being put out. But the other thing that I think most important for today, I want the cabinet members to keep good people. Now, I don't want to see a big cut where a lot of good people are cut. I want the cabinet members to keep the good people, and the people that aren't doing a good job, that are unreliable, don't show up to work, et cetera, those people can be cut. So I had a meeting, and I said, I want the cabinet members, go first, keep all the people you want, everybody that you need. And it would be better if they were there for 2 years instead of 2 weeks, because in 2 years they'll know the people better. But I want them to do the best job they can. When we have good people, that's precious, that's very important, and we want them to keep the good people. And so we're going to be watching them, and Elon and the group are going to be watching them. And if they can cut, it's better. And if they don't cut, then Elon will do the cutting.
So, Mr. President, is that a reflection that you think Doge and Elon Musk have been moving too quickly?
No, I think they've done an amazing job. They've done an amazing job, and look at what they found. I read it the other night in the speech. I mean, they found these things where billions of dollars has been poured down the drain to things. That's not about people, that's about contracts where billions and billions of dollars was just thrown out the window. It probably got kickbacks. I'm sure there were tremendous kickbacks for the people that authorized those contracts. But no, Elon has been really teaching everybody about the numbers that you can do. But what I want is I want the numbers, but I also want to keep the good people. We want to get rid of the people that aren't working, that aren't showing up, and have a lot of problems. And so they're working together with Elon, and I think we're doing a really great job. We're cutting it down. We have to for the sake of our country. You can't have that kind of fat. It's bloat, and like nobody's ever seen before, where you need 20,000 and they have 120,000 people, and you just don't need that many. And it happens with companies, and it happens with governments, I guess. You could go to a lot of governments, you'd see the same thing. But we're trying to get it down. We want to be able, next year, we could balance the budget. I think there's a good chance we could balance the budget next year. We have a lot of good things happening. Plus, we have a lot of revenue things happening, like today with the shipbuilding. And this gentleman behind me is going to create a lot of jobs. And you know, he's about the biggest there is in the world. We had the biggest chip maker in the world here a few days ago. He's going to be spending $200 billion on building plants. We're not giving them any money to build it either. You know, it's not, that CHIP Act is ridiculous, where the Biden thing, where they give billions of dollars to people that have nothing but money. They're not going to spend that money. They're just taking that money. We're giving nothing. They're coming in because of the tariffs, because they don't want to pay the tariffs, and they're opening up big. So, but with respect to people, I said, I want to cut the people, but I want to keep the good people.
President, tariffs, sir, can you walk us through the next steps on this? Steel and aluminum tariffs are due to kick in next week on Canada, Mexico, and every other country. Are those going to be modified as well?
No, those aren't modified. Those are happening next week. And the big one will be on April 2nd, when reciprocal tariffs. So if India or China or any of the countries that really, India is a very high tariff nation. I'll tell you what's a high tariff nation is Canada. Canada charges us 250% for our milk product and other product, and a tremendous tariff on lumber and things as such. And yet we don't need their lumber. We have more lumber than they do. We don't need Canada's lumber. So what I'm doing is I'll be signing an executive order freeing up our forests so that we're allowed to take down trees and make a lot of money and then reharvest trees. Also, we're cutting fire divides. A fire divide is a 50-yard to 70-yard swath where the trees can't, you know, it's long enough so trees don't burn forever until you can get them out. And those trees can be sold and made a lot of money with. So but we'll be doing that. We don't need trees from Canada. We don't need cars from Canada. We don't need energy from Canada. We don't need anything from Canada. So where we can be self-sustaining, which is in most things. Look, we have more oil and gas than anybody. Our forests are massive, massive forests. We're just not allowed to use them because of the environmental lunatics that stopped us. So I'm going to be freeing that up very shortly so that we don't have to go to other countries to buy lumber. You know, why should we be buying lumber from other countries, paying tariffs, paying big prices, extraordinary prices, and we have lumber. We have the best lumber. Go ahead.
And this USMCA exemption that you're essentially announcing today for this 1 month?
It's just a modification, short term, because I didn't want to hurt the American, it would have hurt the American car companies if I did that.
Would you consider the same sort of exemption or pause for the auto tariffs you're talking about next month?
We're not looking at that, no.
You're not
No, we're not
considering
looking at
exempting?
that, no, no.
Revoking the TPS for the Ukrainians who live here in the U.S.?
What about it?
Are you considering revoking the TPS status for the more than 200,000 Ukrainians who live here in the U.S.?
Oh, what are you saying? I don't-
The Ukrainians that are here in the
Yeah,
U.S.,
yeah.
they're under a TPS status.
On GPS?
TPS, temporary status.
temporary-
Oh, I thought you said GPS.
TPS.
Yeah.
There was some news saying that they were going to be revoked and they were going to be deported from the country. Are you considering that for the
Well, we're not
Ukrainians?
looking to hurt anybody, and we're certainly not looking to hurt them. And I'm looking at that, and there were some people that think that's appropriate and some people don't, and I'll be making a decision pretty soon. Okay?
President Trump says-
But we're not looking to hurt them,
President Trump said-
especially Ukrainians. They've gone through a lot. Yeah, Peter?
The clocks are going to spring forward on Sunday. When are you going to get rid of daylight savings?
Okay, are you ready? So, this should be the easiest one of all, but it's a 50-50 issue. And if something's a 50-50 issue, it's hard to get excited about it. I assume people would like to have more light later, but some people want to have more light earlier because they don't want to take their kids to school in the dark. And it's very much, it's a little bit one way, but it's very much a 50-50 issue. And it's something I can do, but a lot of people like it one way, a lot of people like it the other way. It's very even. And usually I find when that's the case, what else do we have to do?
And I got to ask, because you were talking about this in your joint address, you were talking about Butler. It's been 7 months. Why do you think we don't know more about the guy who shot you in the ear?
Yeah, oh, well, and the second one with all of his cell phones. So I want to find the answers. I've told them. In fact, today I said, I want to find, we can no longer blame Biden for that one. He should have released that a long time ago. So they are giving me a report next week sometime, and I do believe I'll be releasing. I want to release the report. A lot of people have asked that question. You had one who had 3 apps, 2 of which were foreign, supposedly, and who has the biggest white shoe law firm in Pennsylvania, even though they don't live in necessarily a white shoe area. What's that all about? His law, you know, the law firm. The other one had 7 or 6 cell phones, and I don't have 6 cell phones. And why would somebody have 6 cell phones? So we're going to be releasing a report on that soon, Peter.
But based on what you're saying right there, the lack of information and
Yeah.
the data points that you just gave, does that make you think that there's some part of that there's some bigger?
It could be. Well, it makes other people think that. It makes me think it a little bit, too. I say, when you have 3 apps and 2 of them are foreign, and you had an FBI that wouldn't report on it, they didn't want to say why, I would say that could be suspicious. And then on the second assassin, you had, you know, and by the way, I have to tell you, Secret Service did a great job on that by spotting him. But on the second one, he had 6 cell phones. That's a lot of cell phones. And a couple of them had some strange markings on them. So, yeah, I want to find out, and I would be willing to release it. I mean, maybe there's a reason that we shouldn't, so I don't want to get too far ahead of my skis, but Yeah, I would be very willing to release that. I'd like to see it. I want to see it myself, Peter. Not only you, I want to see that one myself.
Mr. President,
May I?
Yes.
President Macron yesterday said that France was ready to offer its nuclear protection to other European countries. What do you make of it? And in this case, would the U.S. also maintain a nuclear umbrella for European countries?
Well, France is also willing to put soldiers into Ukraine for safety reasons if we can get it. I will say that we've made a lot of progress with Ukraine and a lot of progress with Russia over the last couple of days. And it'd be great to bring that to an end so we don't have to talk that way about nuclear. It'd be great if everybody would get rid of their nuclear weapons. You know, we have Russia and us have by far the most. China will have an equal amount within 4 or 5 years. And it would be great if we could all denuclearize, because the power of nuclear weapons is crazy. It is crazy. And, you know, I was very far along a process with Russia, despite the Russia hoax, which didn't make it easy. It was a total hoax, a total rigged hoax by some bad people. But despite that, I was very close to having a program with Russia, denuclearization, and we're going to get China. I spoke to President Xi about it, and he would have been very happy to have gone along with it. But bad things happened, like an election that was rigged happened, and so we had to come back 4 years later. But I would very much like to start those talks. The opposite of what you say, the denuclearization would be incredible.
Mr. President, on the auto tariffs that you were talking about, I know yesterday you spoke with the big three. Did you tell them that no more exemptions were on the way, and what was the reaction?
I told them, that's it. This was a short-term deal. And they came back to me yesterday. They said, could we have some help on the tariffs because of the speed? And I said, look, I'm going to do it, but that's it. Don't come back to me after the April 2nd. I don't want to hear from you after April 2nd. We're not going to be doing it anymore. I want to help them.
What was their response?
They didn't complain, but I helped them short-term during this short-term transition. April 2nd is going to be a very big day for America.
Mr. President, my understanding is that the longstanding U.S. policy is that we do not negotiate with terrorists. So how did you come to the decision to send somebody from your team to negotiate with Hamas?
We are having discussions with Hamas. We are helping Israel in those discussions because we're talking about Israeli hostages. And we're not doing anything in terms of Hamas. We're not giving cash. We're not giving $6 billion like you hear other administrations give. In fact, I got 59 hostages out, and we gave nothing. In 59, we gave nothing, not including what's going on with Hamas. I mean, I consider that something where we're helping Israel for the most part. We had a couple of hostages, as you know. We got a couple of hostages out, American hostages.
Mr. President,
But certainly, Peter, you have to negotiate. There's a difference between negotiating and paying. We want to get these people out. If you would have seen the people yesterday, maybe you did, I don't know, but if you would have seen them, the way they spoke about their captivity, it was unbelievable. It's terrible.
Are you thinking about making any changes to NATO where a NATO country gets attacked, but they're not paying enough dues, so the United States doesn't defend them?
Well, I've said that to them. I said, if you're not going to pay, we're not going to defend. I said that 7 years ago. And because of that, they paid hundreds of billions of dollars. I said, if you're not going to pay your bills, we're not going to defend you. And it also went for the attack. But if they got attacked, they said, well, does that mean you won't defend us? I said, are you current or are you delinquent? They said, if we were delinquent, would you? I said, nope, I would not. And because of that, as you know, hundreds of billions of dollars came into NATO. You wouldn't have NATO right now if I weren't there. And your previous Secretary General has said that. He said he's never seen anything like it. When I came to NATO, when I first had my first meeting, I noticed that people weren't paying their bills at all. And I said I should wait till my second meeting, and I did. And I brought that up. And I said, if you don't pay your bills, we're not going to participate. We're not going to protect you. And when I said that, as soon as I said that, it was amazing how the money came in. The money came in, and now they have money. But even now, it's not enough. It's really not enough. They should be paying more.
Mr. President, question on the investment, sir. You've overseen about $2 trillion worth of domestic private sector investments come in just about 2 months. This is the newest one. It comes after your announcement of a new shipbuilding office at the White House during your joint session to Congress. Can you talk about why this is important, not only for national security, but to continue the renaissance of domestic manufacturing?
Well, we have to maintain a strong country. We have to maintain, and we want to pay off debt. We have a lot of debt, but that'll start coming off quickly when this all comes around. Look, we've been supporting the whole world. You mentioned NATO and you mentioned other things. We've been supporting the whole world. When I first came in, we were paying almost 100% of NATO. NATO it was crazy. We were supporting NATO. We were paying the bills for other countries, and yet those same countries, mostly European, the European countries, were ripping us off in trade. They won't take our cars. They wouldn't take our agricultural product. They wouldn't take anything. Yet we were taking their cars by the millions, Mercedes and BMW and Volkswagen, all of them. We were taking their cars. They weren't taking it. We were taking their farm products. They weren't taking ours. It's a total ripoff. And yet we were protecting them by giving them the money. And, that adds up to a bad number at the end of a lot of years. And that's what happened. And now it's time for this country to stop being ripped off. I had that done very much in the first administration, but then we had to focus on other things at the very end with COVID. But we had the greatest economy in history. We had the greatest economy in history. I think we're going to redo it here, but even better. And I wanted to do what we're doing now in the first term, but we had so many other things to do. We had to fix the border, which we did. We had to fix our military. We rebuilt our military. We completely rebuilt the military, only to watch Biden give so much of it away to Afghanistan, if you can believe it. It's not even believable. It's not even believable what he did. The damage that man did, or that administration did, to this country is frankly not even believable. And in particular, allowing millions and millions of people to come into our country. Many of them were murderers and drug dealers and gang members and people from prison for very heinous crimes. For him to allow those people into our country, and now we're spending tremendous amounts of time and effort. Nikki and Tom Homan, who's doing an unbelievable job, but we shouldn't have to be spending anything on that. We had the safest border ever. Now we have actually, as you saw, the numbers just came out, where we have actually the lowest numbers in the history of our country. But we shouldn't have had to do that. What we're doing now is we're looking for murderers. Can you believe it? We're looking for murderers because thousands of murderers, some about 50%, killed more than one person. One killed 5 or 7. And we're looking for those people right now. We shouldn't have to be looking for
President Trump, on Peter's question, are you going to make that policy, U.S. policy, that the U.S. wouldn't defend NATO countries that don't pay?
Well, I think it's common sense, right? If they don't pay, I'm not going to defend them. No, I'm not going to defend them. I got into a lot of heat when I said that. You said, oh, he's violating NATO. And, the biggest problem I have with NATO, I really, I know the guys very well. They're friends of mine. But if the United States was in trouble and we called them, we said, we got a problem, France, we got a problem, a couple of others I won't mention. Do you think they're going to come and protect us? They're supposed to. I'm not so sure. So with Japan, we have a deal, which is a very interesting one. And I love Japan. We have a great relationship with Japan. But we have an interesting deal with Japan that we have to protect them, but they don't have to protect us. Do you know that? That's the way the deal reads. We have to protect Japan. And by the way, they make a fortune with us economically. There's another case. But we have to protect Japan. But under no circumstances do they have to protect us. I actually asked, who makes these deals? Yeah, Peter?
Well, so why stay in NATO at all?
I view NATO as potentially good, but you gotta get some good thinking in NATO. It's very unfair what's been happening. Until I came along, we were paying close to 100% of NATO. So think of it. We're paying 100% of their military, and they're screwing us on trade.
And when Zelensky inevitably comes back to the White House, what do you expect from him? And do you think you'll see him in a necktie?
Well, I think what's going to happen is Ukraine wants to make a deal because I don't think they have a choice. I also think that Russia wants to make a deal because in a different way that only I know, they have no choice either.
Are you still thinking of going to Saudi Arabia and meeting with Putin about this?
I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm going to Saudi Arabia.
Mr. President,
They've been very, I've made a deal with Saudi Arabia where, because normally you'd go to UK first, and last time I went to Saudi Arabia, they put up $450 billion. You know that, right? You were there. We had American companies that took in $450 billion. I said, well, this time they've gotten richer. We've all gotten older. So I said, I'll go if you pay $1 trillion, $1 trillion to American companies, meaning the purchase over a 4-year period of $1 trillion. And they've agreed to do that. So I'm going to be going there, and I have a great relationship with them. And they've been very nice, but they're going to be spending a lot of money to American companies for buying military equipment and a lot of other things.
Is that a trip in the near future?
Probably over the next month and a half. Yeah.
Mr. President, you told us a couple weeks ago that you were looking to speak with President Xi of China. That hasn't happened. How come? What are you waiting for?
I have spoken to him, yeah.
Since that last phone call?
I don't want to say that, but I have spoken to him. Yeah, please.
Yeah, Mr. President,
I have a great relationship with President Xi.
But you've spoken to him.
It was hurt because of COVID.
Thank you, Mr.
That's why I don't call it the China virus anymore. He said, please don't call it the China virus.
But to be clear, you've spoken to him since January 17th?
I don't want to say that, but I have spoken to him.
Thank you,
And
Mr. President.
I speak to him a lot.
Regarding this executive order you signed revoking security clearances at Perkins Coie.
You've been listening to U.S. President Donald Trump in the Oval Office speaking about trade with Canada, and it is our understanding that Donald Trump has put a pause on tariffs on Canada, 25% tariffs on Canadian goods, 10% on oil. That is inside the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, or the new NAFTA that's been in place for several years since his first presidency. But we also heard the U.S. president saying that steel and aluminum tariffs are coming in next week. He talked about the dairy industry in Canada and criticized it, saying, and these are just his words, saying that that it's very unfair, that there's a huge extra price in terms of the milk product. He also criticized Canadian lumber, saying that the United States doesn't need Canadian lumber, that they're going to open up U.S. forests, and they don't need Canadian cars, don't need energy or anything from Canada, and saying that this break, this pause, is for 1 month until April 2nd. The CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick has been following along with us. So, Megan, what's your understanding based on what we heard there in terms of what may or may not be included in this pause on those basically the 25% tariffs?
I was actually going to ask you, Andrew, what your understanding was, because I wasn't in the chair for the very beginning of the tape. So I was wondering if I had missed it, if he had made an actual announcement that he was giving these exemptions to Canada and Mexico. So from what I heard, I didn't hear him make the actual announcement. But that is what is being reported by wire services and reporters who were in the room for that entire availability in the Oval Office. So, so our understanding is that is the case, that he is now giving an exemption to imports from Canada and Mexico that fall under the free trade agreement between the three countries. There are some goods that don't and would still be subject to those tariffs that he imposed earlier in the week. But for those goods that do fall under the agreement, our understanding is that they will not be subject to the tariffs for the next 4 weeks. And he was making it pretty clear there, Andrew, that no further extension
suspensions or pauses, postponements would go beyond April 2nd. That's the day, he said, is going to be a very big day for America. And April 2nd is when he has pegged the start of what he calls reciprocal tariffs. So far, the tariffs he has imposed are on China, Canada, and Mexico. But he plans on imposing tariffs on every country that the U.S. trades with that he feels are not treating the U.S. fairly, and might have tariffs on U.S. imports or other non-tariff related trade barriers. And so that is more to come on April 2nd. And so what he's doing now is putting a pause on these tariffs that went into effect just until then. Yesterday, we had the pause on the auto sector, and he spoke a bit more about that in the phone call that he had with the CEOs of those companies. And he did say there that he told them, don't come back to me again and ask for any further exemptions after April 2nd. So this is not that much of a relief, probably, Andrew, to the auto sector, who were breathing a sigh of relief yesterday. But Trump making it clear they're not going to get another pause beyond April 2nd. So that's still going to leave a lot of uncertainty for that sector and all the other sectors who are very concerned right now about the effect of these tariffs. So he also did, as you mentioned, confirm the steel and aluminum ones are still going into effect next week. And those were supposed to layer on top of the ones going into effect this week. And he still intends on imposing those, he said. So we're going to try and keep getting more details on this, but we do know he had a phone call with the Mexican president, Claudia Sheinbaum, this morning. He wrote about it on social media, describing their very good relationship, he said, and saying he was giving this pause out of respect for her and the work that Mexico has done, he says, on tightening the border, which is the supposed rationale for these tariffs in the first place. There's a consequence for Mexico and Canada not doing enough to tighten the border to prevent the flow of illegal immigration and fentanyl. But he also wrote on social media about Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this morning, saying he's done a terrible job for Canada and essentially laying the blame on Trudeau for imposing these tariffs on Canada. I'm not sure, and I'm not sure what reporting's been coming out of Ottawa today, Andrew, if there's been more phone calls between Trump and Trudeau today, or we know the one they had yesterday was very colorful, was the adjective I think
Choice
Trudeau
words, profanity.
used.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'll try and get more, but that's what we heard so far from Trump out of the Oval Office just a few minutes ago.
All right, Megan Fitzpatrick, thank you. CBC Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton is watching developments, joins me now live from Ottawa. And so, Rosie, what do we know about what this means?
But first of all, Canada is going to look at this executive order in detail before it responds and tells Canadians what it plans to do now. But let me break down what we understand by talking to a variety of people inside government and outside government about what has actually happened just now. This is a significant thing. This means that there will be a pause on almost all Canadian goods inside the free trade agreement for another month. When Donald Trump and the administration talk about being CUSMA compliant or USMCA compliant, that is because in order to fall into that free trade agreement, you do have to seek out preferential designation and meet the rules of origin standards. So you have to do some paperwork, essentially, if you are importing things to the United States. And indeed, some manufacturers and exporters have not done that. But in theory, everything that is produced in Canada could fall under CUSMA and then all be relieved from this 25% tariff. And everything could then be on pause for another month, with the exception, as you just heard there from Megan, Andrew, of steel and aluminum, which Donald Trump says is going to continue, and with the threat that a month from now, we may be dealing with a whole new set of threats and tariffs. But this is, just so we understand, that this is a significant reversal. This is a pause of that 25% and 10% on Canadian goods. And for Canadian goods that are currently not compliant with the free trade agreement, they can seek to become compliant, right? They can seek the paperwork process in order to fall under that designation. And so undoubtedly, that's what companies will struggle to do, will try and get done over the next days and weeks. this still lends an enormous amount of instability to the economy, to the future trade deal with the United States. The president has now dangled other threats over our heads. But I do think we should take a moment just to understand that this is the best of, the possible outcomes here is that there is another pause, and somehow we will have to manage through that yet again.
Yeah, I mean, this is really important information, Rosemary, because it's really hard to kind of get your head around what all of this means. So it's your understanding that this either does or very well could apply to the vast majority. I want to be careful in terms of the language that I use and that we use, but on most Canadian goods, right, going from Canada into the U.S. are now for at least a month, aside from steel and aluminum that the president says he's still going to impose. That's a sort of separate tariff on steel and aluminum, 25%. That's March 12th, I believe. So this is a lift on all, basically most other goods from Canada to the U.S.
It will be. I think that's the best way to say it. What the White House has been saying is that 62% of Canadian imports fall outside of the free trade agreement. I don't know if that's an accurate figure, but there are certainly goods that fall outside of that agreement because in order to become eligible for the free trade agreement, you actually have to seek out that preference, market preference. And in order to do that, you do have to meet some goalposts. You do have to prove country of origin and some other things. It's very complicated. I'm not going to get into. I'm just reading the forms you have to fill out. But presumably, Canadian companies could start that and now no longer be subject to this 25% tariffs. This is still not great, right? I mean, again, just to talk about the instability of what we are dealing with here. Tariffs coming on some industries next week, possibility of other tariffs at the beginning of April, and possibility that we go back to where we were on Monday at the beginning of April too. So I guess the question now is when the Canadian government looks at the document, the executive order, which is really, as we know, very important in order to understand what the president is actually up to, are they reassured by that? And then what do they do with counter tariffs? There are $30 billion, remember, of counter tariffs in place right now. There was a second wave of $125 billion in counter tariffs that was to follow. My guess is that they don't press ahead with the second wave for now to see whether or not they can get this to hold a little bit longer beyond the April 2nd deadline that the president has now given. But would they pull back the 30 billion tariffs? I don't suspect so. I mean, I don't think you want to give anything up to the president right now, given that he is continuing to make this threat.
I mean, that is, yeah. I mean, we don't know. I mean, that's something to watch for. But also, we've already had reaction from the first premier that I've seen, at least, and that is David Eby, who was asked kind of live in the moment that this was happening. I don't know whether he had been told beforehand. We all sort of learned of it quickly. And he said that he thinks that Canada, the Canadian response, needs to kind of be full steam ahead with whatever reaction, the retaliatory measures are there until the threat of these tariffs is removed. So that's so far an official response from a Canadian premier.
Yeah, and I will say that everything that federal ministers and sources are telling us and have told us over the past 24 hours is this isn't a negotiation to mitigate damage on the economy or to lower the tariffs or indeed to seek a pause on the tariffs. This is a negotiation to end this trade war, to stop it entirely. So I don't suspect that Ottawa will come out today and say they're getting rid of the $30 billion in counter tariffs. I do think that this gives them a little bit of room before they decide to bring in the next wave. But we've also heard from Premier Ford today, Andrew, and it was very clear that he is going full steam ahead on Monday with the 25% tariffs on electricity to a handful of states close to Ontario. So, in terms of a negotiating tactic, I don't think that it's a sigh of relief, but it's very temporary and probably not particularly reassuring to companies that are trying to figure out what the weeks and months ahead are going to look like.
And to underscore your point, Doug
Yeah.
Ford was asked, he did an interview on American Network, and then he was asked in a scrum very specifically, he said, look, are you saying that even if, this was before we learned that this pause would come into place, are you saying even if there is a pause, a 1-month pause, similar to what Mexico got, because we got that earlier in the day, that this 25% electricity tax, if you will, on those 3 American border states, that will still be in place? And he said, yes, the threat has to be removed. Now, when you say Ottawa's reaction, Rosie, I couldn't help but think, well, Ottawa's reaction is, somewhat synonymous with the Prime Minister, the PMO. I mean, and Justin Trudeau is not going to be Prime Minister for much longer, just the next, whether it's a few days or a week. And so how does that play into all of this?
Yeah, I mean, listen, there will be, the cabinet is meeting, I think, about now. I should tell you that too, Andrew, to go over some last kind of bits of business that this cabinet needs to do. There is a transition piece that happens, whether it's a change of government after an election, or in this case, a new prime minister. So there will be work being done to brief whoever becomes the next Liberal leader and get some of those key things in place for that person. I think one of the things that we should look for next week, when we would expect the new Prime Minister to be sworn in, is that they would, I would expect again, keep some of those key cabinet ministers in place, right? So that if they're naming a new cabinet, people like Dominic LeBlanc, who have been on the phone with Howard Lutnick, for hours and hours over the course of the past number of days, keep those people in those key roles, so that the transition for the new Prime Minister is a little bit easier. I also think, to be frank, that the way the President has been needling and insulting Prime Minister Trudeau over the past number of days is that's going to come to an end. Whatever his beef is with Justin Trudeau, that doesn't seem to appear in phone calls from what we understand, but whatever his problem is, he will have to find a new person to insult and attack, and maybe just taking away that personal acrimony that the president seems to have towards the prime minister could help a little bit. I don't know, but that is, I think, something to keep in mind, that a new prime minister will have challenges in terms of getting up to speed and understanding these relationships, but there might also be a little bit of a benefit to being someone that the president doesn't know as well.
And Rosie, I thought it was interesting that, when we heard that when we saw the post that Donald Trump put out saying that Justin Trudeau is trying to cling on to power, the insulting, and then the information that we have, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that phone call between the president and the prime minister, where Trump used profanity, and then contrast that with the conversation that Trump had with the Mexican president, how good it was, how respectful it was, this kind of language, and then to see, the bad relationship with one leader, the good relationship with another leader, and yet the pause on these tariffs for both countries. So it makes you wonder, what does it matter?
Yes, I mean, it's one of these moments where we're trying to apply rational thought to understanding the president's strategy, and I'm not sure that works in this instance, right? You're right. He obviously had a colorful conversation, as the prime minister described it, with the president yesterday. I should say that Justin Trudeau didn't use any profanity, just the president, and came away from that, I guess, still with issues around Justin Trudeau. But ultimately, if we end up in the same place as Mexico, to your point, I'm not sure that it matters that he apparently or seemingly doesn't respect the prime minister very much, and I would just say that it is true though that the prime minister did take a very forceful stance against the president, and I would imagine that got back to him and irked him in some way. That's me speculating there, but I would imagine that.
It was also interesting, Rosie, maybe we can talk just a little bit about this, and that is that we heard from Ellie Jolie talking about this psychodrama. She described it as a psychodrama, and then Justin Trudeau was asked about that, how he would characterize it, and he said Thursday. But then we saw some reaction from David Eby, the Premier of British Columbia, and he said, we need to make sure that Americans and that the president knows, and he used this language, he said, the Canadians are pissed off. I mean, the anger is still there. If the pause is still there, the anger is still there.
Yeah, listen, I don't think this fundamentally changes the issue of broken trust and questions about what is going to happen next. I will say Melanie Joly saying psychodrama, I'm sure, as you know, in French that is a common phrase, psychodrame, that people say. So I think she just sort of translated it into English. But I mean, essentially, that's what this is, right? We are still in a now paused trade war, I guess, to some extent, or an ongoing trade war with a little bit of relief with the president. And we have no idea what to do to get him to stop doing it entirely. And that, again, I think it's important for Canadians to remember, is the ultimate goal. It is not to go through the next 4 years negotiating a pause with the president every single month. That is not going to be satisfactory for Canadians, and that is not going to be good enough for the Canadian economy and the stock markets, which we've talked about multiple times, Andrew, that are suffering given what Donald Trump has done over this past week.
So, Rosie, what do you think this means in terms of, so there will be a new prime minister, we know that. Does this mean, do you think that there will be a renegotiation of that new NAFTA between the three countries sooner rather than later? Does that happen in the middle of what could be an election campaign? That seems hard to imagine. I mean, how does this kind of possibly all play out?
So that review is slated for 2026, although we've talked about Donald Trump potentially wanting to do that sooner, given that he's not respecting it as it now stands. I don't think that anyone would have the mandate to do that at this stage. I think that during an election that wouldn't happen, of course. So whoever forms the next government would decide what the next steps are, unless, of course, whoever becomes the next prime minister decides that things are so dire that they are going to test Parliament to see if they can get the confidence of the House, which I think would be unlikely. So again, then in that scenario, we end up in an election campaign, to your point, where some of this has to be put on ice until we figure out who's forming government, who's the next prime minister, and what they would do in terms of their approach with Donald Trump. But that is a good point, Andrew, because no matter what happens here, we're going to have a different prime minister, whether it's next week with a Liberal leader or after an election campaign. And so things are changing politically here, and that may change the dynamic with Donald Trump. But to your very good point, maybe it does nothing. Maybe it changes nothing at all, because who really understands what's going on?
Rosie, you've helped us understand a lot of what is going on. Appreciate this very much. Thank you. That is CBC's chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton, live in Ottawa. For more on this breaking news, we connect with Jitene De Silva in Calgary. She is Alberta's former Deputy Minister for International and Intergovernmental Relations, and Jitene was also Alberta's representative in Washington under the first Trump administration. Jitene, thank you very much for taking the time. What is your reaction to this?
Well, the chaos continues. I mean, every day it's a new adventure, sometimes multiple adventures a day. This delay is certainly welcome, but I would say it's far from the ideal outcome. The ideal outcome is to put this tariff war to rest for good. The question is, how do we do that? It was interesting today that the president focused on a few of those traditional irritants. So we know those are still there, dairy and softwood lumber, of course, but also interesting, I thought that he referenced bad actor companies, not just countries, which I thought was interesting. So maybe a hint about where he might be focusing his efforts next.
Yeah, so what is your understanding? We're really trying to get an understanding of what is covered in all of this. So this pause, what's your understanding of what this pause on tariffs for Canada means?
So it would be things that are covered by the NAFTA or USMCA or CUSMA agreement, but not those things, from what I understand. I mean, this is breaking news for all of us. Yeah. Not those things outside of the agreement. So something like softwood lumber, for example, where there's a traditional set of irritants there that would not be receiving this relief. And then certainly as well, there's certain auto parts. Some auto parts meet the rule of origin requirements and some do not. So presumably the tariffs would stay in effect for those items. But I think we really need to see the executive order and the exact wording to understand what's in and what's out.
So on the auto sector, though, we heard about that kind of pause coming yesterday. So that would be the big three American, Stellantis, GM, and Ford. Presumably, that would all be exempt. That's sort of yesterday's news, right? I mean, is that your kind of understanding?
Well, it gets a bit complicated because several of the pieces of the auto parts are covered by the USMCA or the CUSMA if they meet that country of origin requirement. But increasingly, we've seen auto companies source items from elsewhere that don't quite meet that threshold. So the question I have is are those inputs exempt from this 25% or not? That's unclear to me.
So Jiten, what does this mean for businesses in Canada? I mean, is this relief? Is this good news? Is this confusing news? I mean, how would you characterize this moment?
Well, any delay is good news, I think, right? You've got the opportunity to catch your breath a little bit and figure out how you will respond. I think it's really an opportunity for business to continue to keep the pressure up on our government, provincial governments, and also really lean in with our contacts on the American side. I mean, I think what we're seeing here is U.S. businesses speak up. We haven't seen a lot of Republican elected officials speak up, but those businesses leaning on their contacts on the White House and explaining what the negative impacts will be, I think that's where we're seeing this move. So I would encourage Canadian business leaders to continue to speak up and engage there and really explain how this is bad news for the American economy, not just the Canadian economy, because we always have greater success when Americans carry that message to their elected officials as opposed to us doing it ourselves as Canadians.
And so we have heard, as Rosie was saying, that the Canadian government is not going to respond to this until they see the executive order. Because it's one thing to hear Donald Trump speak in the Oval Office, it's another thing to read what is on paper. So what do you make of that reaction?
I think it's very wise. This is really a situation where we're negotiating with someone who is very unpredictable, and the goalposts are changing constantly. So, and part of that is a negotiating tactic to keep us on balance and to keep us responding to their requests. So we need to be principled in what we want to achieve. And so I think absolutely reading the fine print before we make any decisions is the right path in this moment.
Jiten, thank you. Jiten De Silva joining us live in Calgary. I want to bring in Inu Manik now. She is a fellow for trade policy with the Council on Foreign Relations, and she is an expert in international political economy and the World Trade Organization, and she joins me now live in Washington. So, Inu, Trump has now lifted tariffs on what we think is most Canadian and Mexican goods covered under the free trade agreement, but it's a temporary reprieve. What do you make of this moment?
Well, I think it's a stunning reversal of what he said earlier this week, that he has a no exemption policy to tariffs. Clearly, he does take exemptions. And this is a pause. It's a pause for another month. It means there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, and we're going to see these tariffs maybe come back again in 1 month from now. So there's all this no telling of what's going to happen next, and we're going to have tariffs next week too. But I have to say, the devil's going to be in the details. When we see the executive order that he apparently just signed, we're going to see exactly how these exemptions are going to work and who it's going to apply to.
Yeah. So what's your understanding in this moment about how this works?
Well, so far what we've heard is that USMCA goods would be exempt. Now, it's not quite clear what that means, because at the end of the day, there are a lot of products that cross the border that don't really come under USMCA rules. So when you sell a product, it comes with a customs certificate, and the business notes down exactly what rules are trading under. So they'll say, this is from a USMCA preference. You get a different tariff under there. Now, there's a lot of trade that actually comes in outside of that. So that means about 60% of what we import in the United States from Canada and about 50% of what we import from Mexico could still potentially face tariffs. So if he's not talking about all trade with Canada and Mexico and just the stuff that comes under the trade agreement, then there's still going to be a lot of stuff that faces tariffs.
All right. So there is this executive order, and I think I should. I don't know whether I'm going to read all of it, but I'll just read some of it and just try and I'm trying to speak to you, trying to read this, doing it all at once, and so it's a little bit. Forgive me if it's just all coming sort of fast and furious, but this is what's the executive order: amendment to duties to address the flow of illicit drugs across our northern border by the authority vested in me as president. He goes on to put a bunch of different codes in there that I won't read. Automotive production is a major source of United States employment and innovation and is integral to U.S. economic and national security. The American automotive industry is currently structured often trades substantial volumes of automotive parts and components across our borders in the interest of bringing supply chains closer to North America. In order to minimize disruption to the U.S. automotive industry and automotive workers, it is appropriate to adjust the tariffs imposed on articles of Canada in the executive order of February 1st, 2025, imposing duties to address the flow of illicit drugs across our northern border. So that's that part. Then also saying that articles that are entered free of duty as a good of Canada under the terms of the General Note 11 to the Harmonized Tariff Schedule, including any treatment set forth, and again, a bunch of numbers that I won't get into, as related to the agreement between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada, shall not be subject to the additional rate of duty described in these different sections. So that is, the modifications set out shall be effective with respect to goods entered for consumption or withdrawn from warehouse for consumption on or after 12:01 Eastern Time on March 7th, 2025. So it goes in at midnight. Nothing in this order shall be construed to impair or otherwise affect different agencies and that kind of thing. I don't think I need to read all that, but just, so there you go. I've just sort of read it quickly. So just, can you react to what I just read and what your understanding is of that?
Yeah, so from that, it sounds like only products that are coming into the United States under the USMCA rules are what's going to be exempt from the tariff. So that means that there's still going to be tariffs applied to a whole host of other goods. We can take a look at example at the auto rules of origin as well, which are the rules that make up whether or not you qualify for that preference. And if you look at just vehicle imports, 11% from Canada and 15% from Mexico don't come under the USMCA preference. That means that they would face the higher tariff, right? And in fact, it was negotiated in the USMCA that we raised the needed North American content of autos to 75%. It used to be 62% under NAFTA. So this has already pushed manufacturers to trade under non-USMCA rules, and it looks like they're going to have to face a lot more tariffs in the coming days.
Thank you for listening through that as we try and figure it all out. Appreciate it. Inu Menik, Fellow for Trade Policy at the Council of Foreign Relations. Now, the early response from leaders on this side of the border, a reprieve isn't nearly good enough. Karina Roman is tracking reaction here. So, Karina, we have the text of the order. What should people be taking away from it?
Well, I just think the automotive production part is the most interesting part because it talks about being a major source of United States employment and innovation, that it's integral to the United States economic and national security, and that as it's currently structured, often trade substantial volumes of parts and components across the borders in the interest of bringing supply chains closer to North America. So it's a recognition of what has been argued to Donald Trump and his administration and those around him, particularly about the automotive industry, just how integrated it is. So it says, in order to minimize disruption to the United States automotive industry and automotive workers, it is appropriate to adjust the imposed on Canada. So that to me is a recognition, acknowledgement of what Canada has been trying to tell them for a while. And of course that it goes on, as you read earlier. So to me, that's the key takeaway, is that they actually spell that out in the executive order.
Okay, so that's that. And now some of the premiers are speaking out, and we heard from one premier who the anger, I mean, it was there, and it doesn't matter that this, I mean, it does matter that this is paused. I do not want to say that, but there's still a lot of Canadian politicians in this country that are upset that these tariffs are still kind of looming.
Yeah, so that anger was most recently expressed by David Eby, who's the Premier of British Columbia. He was out making an announcement of things that his province is doing to bolster its own economy, whether it's interprovincial trade barriers or mandating Canadian production of certain things like low-carbon fuels. He talked about they're going to apply tolls and fees to U.S. commercial vehicles that use BC infrastructure to travel to Alaska. And these are all going ahead regardless of the pause. And you know, he, as other premiers, and we'll hear from Doug Ford in a bit, but say this constant cycle of tariff reprieve is exhausting. Have a listen to what he had to say.
Yet again, the president is sowing uncertainty and chaos, attempting to undermine our economy by implementing tariffs and then quickly pulling them off. My message for the Prime Minister, for my colleagues across the country, and it's one I'm sure they want to deliver to me too, is stand strong. We are not going to accept these continual threats, this continued uncertainty. We're going to stand up for Canadians. This is unacceptable. And we're going to ensure that the Americans understand how pissed off we are, how unified we are, how committed we are to working as a country to stand up for each other and our own independence on our own 2 feet. And I say we don't let up until the president takes the threat off the table.
And Karina, just some breaking news. This comes from the Finance Minister, Dominic LeBlanc. Do you have that? Or do you want me to do? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, it says the United States, this is from Dominic LeBlanc, the United States has agreed to suspend tariffs on CUSMA-compliant exports from Canada until April 2nd. As a result, Canada will not proceed with the second wave of tariffs. That's the $125 billion worth of tariffs of U.S. products until April 2nd, while we continue to work for the removal of all tariffs. So the $30 billion initial tariffs are still in place, but they are delaying the implementation, which were kind of delayed anyway 3 weeks because they had to undergo consultation before being brought in. But this is a definitive delay with an actual date till April 2nd, which is when the Americans are saying, or the Trump administration is saying, we will still see reciprocal tariffs, which of course Canada is trying to resist as well. So that answers the question that we were asking earlier, Andrew, which is, you know, what will be the federal response to this latest pause?
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly interesting information. And that is the reasoning behind that, just to extrapolate from that, is that the Canadian government is really focused, right, in terms of like the threat needs to just go away.
And that's something, I mean, Doug Ford was out today 3 times. He was out, he was on, I can't remember which network this morning. He was in a scrum at Queen's Park, and he was on Fox News talking about this 25% surcharge that Ontario still plans to bring in on electricity that it exports on Monday. And if we have time to play the clip of him most recently on Fox News talking about that.
Any change in your attitude now that the president in the last 20 minutes said that USMCA compliant products coming in from Canada would be exempt until April 2nd from the tariffs?
No, we're going to put a 25% tariff on electricity coming from Ontario to Michigan, New York, and Minnesota. And isn't this a shame? It's an absolute mess. And I feel terrible. 3 great governors, get along well with them. Great people, and I apologize to the American people. There's one person to be blamed, and this is President Trump. You know, he said he's going to postpone the tariffs. Well, he said that before, and 2 days later, it changed, a few days later. And I learned one thing: you touch a stove and you burn yourself, you don't touch that stove again.
So you can see the anger is palpable, and he's not lifting that 25% threat. He also... Doug Ford didn't say this, but we do have confirmation that American alcohol will also remain off the shelves, at least in Ontario, until the actual threat of tariffs is gone. And there is a statement as well from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, while welcoming the pause, saying it's not a moment to celebrate, and saying the economy is not a toy to play with. And that is the general sentiment, that the uncertainty, these threats, Melanie Joly was talking about even other things that aren't economically related, more about national security, those things that Donald Trump has tossed out there, all of that is unacceptable, that it needs to stop because it is something that is untenable for an economy to continue in any kind of way, in any kind of certain way, when there is so much unpredictability. Now, I think the reality is that unpredictability to some extent is going to remain for at least 4 years. But at least if we could get the threat of tariffs gone permanently, that would please everyone.
It seems like, Karina, it's almost as if the Canadian government or the Canadian response is trying to teach Trump a lesson. Like, don't do this. This is just not on when you have a negotiated agreement that he negotiated. I know we repeat it, but we should repeat it. He negotiated it. He signed it during his first term.
And I think if that's the case, it might account for putting aside the personal relationship between Justin Trudeau and Donald Trump. Some of the disdain he seems to have for Donald Trump seems to have for Canada might be in that Canada has surprised the American administration with its backbone, and that might not be something that they expected. I'm totally speculating there because most of us are not in Donald Trump's mind, but that might be a cause for why we keep getting the pause later than Mexico, for example, and that kind of thing. That relationship we're not as easy a mark as perhaps they assumed.
Yeah, but it's just interesting, right, in terms of the relationship with the President of Mexico, the Prime Minister of Canada, the threats from Canada, the threats from Mexico, and yet both Mexico and Canada get this pause maybe a few hours later, but both get them. So, Karina, thank you. The CBC's Karina Roman live in Ottawa. Let's bring in Moshe Lander to discuss this further. He's a senior lecturer of economics at Concordia University. He joins us from Montreal. Thank you again for taking the time. Just what's your reaction to this, another extraordinary day in terms of all this? What's your reaction?
You tell me, which movie reference should we use? Is it Back to the Future or is it Groundhog Day? I don't know which one it is. My hair is turning white at a pace I can't stand anymore just because of the uncertainty. Great that the tariffs are off the table for another 30 days. Are we going to reconvene this back in April then and have this conversation all over again? I have no idea anymore.
You have no idea. Is this a good moment?
Well, it's better than it was on Tuesday, that's for sure. Good news that there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but again, it's the whims of somebody who seems to change his mind as fast as the rest of us change our underwear. It's impossible to tell if he's going to wake up tomorrow morning and decide this was all a great mistake and I'm going to put it back, or I'm going to create some other disruption or some other demand. Good that the tariffs are gone for now, at least. But I still think that some of the damage has been done and it's irreversible because we can't make clarity of decisions anymore, trusting that the Americans will always be there as our trade partners.
Okay, because I had to kind of do it live on the air, read the executive order, trying to understand the language, I understand you had a moment to kind of read it maybe a little more calmly than I was, or less distracted, I'll say. Can you give us a sense of what you think this means, this pause means?
It just means that anything that's currently in the free trade agreement can seemingly continue as if it's under the free trade agreement. Now, there are some goods and services that we continue to trade that are not within the parameters of what was negotiated, and apparently maybe that tariff is still going to stay in place. But again, there's the carve-outs here. Is it 25%? Is it 10%? And when is it effective, or is it retroactively effective? It's still unclear. That executive order, as you saw, was pretty small, and so it's not exactly clarifying other than just that we're rescinding as it comes to the auto industry. Ironic that in the executive order, it's in the name of trying to create clarity for the auto industry. But of course, the greatest clarity would have been never put it on the table in the first place. Even within the clarity, I'm not sure what that it's easy to absorb.
Just moments ago, the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, had this to say, posting online, saying the only thing that's certain today is more uncertainty. A pause on some tariffs means nothing. Until President Trump removes the threat of tariffs for good, we will be relentless. And speaking of in that spirit, I just want to remind our viewers what the finance minister had to say, and he also tweeted, I don't know whether I can get that fast enough, but he basically said that the $30 billion, this first tranche of retaliatory measures, that is staying in place, but the $125 billion planned for the second tranche is going to be on pause, right? Did I get that right? And
Yeah.
yeah. So there you go. What's your reaction to that?
We only are retaliating because there was a strike against us. And so the Prime Minister and the premiers as part of Team Canada have said all along that we're not looking to do this because we have nothing better to do on a Friday afternoon. We're doing this because you came and attacked us. And until you back away, then this is going to stay in place. So it seems perfectly appropriate then that as long as there's still some form of tariff in play, as long as there's still some sort of negotiation in play, whether that's on April 2nd, March 2nd, May the 2nd, then the $30 billion retaliation seems appropriate. The extra level of added retaliation, the $120 billion, was merely meant that if you're not going to back away from what you started this week, then we're going to have to escalate. But since he seems to be backing away, then it seems right that we should say, all right, nobody wants these tariffs to begin with, least of all Canada. So fine, we'll hold on until you get clarity of mind on your own side and back away from the original problem that you created.
Moshe, thank you. Moshe Lander is a senior lecturer of economics at Concordia University. So to talk more about what motivates Trump in this latest whipsaw, as we see, we connect with Charles Burton. He is a senior fellow at Synopsis and a former Canadian diplomat. And Charles, you wrote about Trump's playbook in the Toronto Star, saying he has extreme designs on Canada. So I want to get into that in a second in terms of what you wrote, but you of course wrote this before we had all of this happen today. So just your reaction to what has happened this afternoon in terms of this pause on the tariffs.
Well, I mean, I think it's really a policy of fomenting chaos to keep us off balance, and so. You know, we're getting this 30-day psychodrama over and over again. We don't know where the future lies, and there's a terrific amount of uncertainty for business and for government. And I think that this serves Donald Trump's overall plan to try and ultimately make Canada so weak that we would agree to become the 51st state, or other concessions that would make us into a kind of vassal of the United States. And you know, we don't have to really understand what he thinks. We just have to listen to what he says. And he certainly made his intentions very clear in a series of statements. And this latest ploy doesn't really suggest that this is over for us, or that next month things will go back to relations as normal. I don't think that's the way this is going to play out.
So if that's his ambition, how should Canadians and the Canadian government, Canadian premiers, the Prime Minister or the next Prime Minister, how should people react?
Well, I think that, you know, certainly the obvious thing is that we should have a number of tariff and non-tariff responses. And if we do have that, then I think Canada has to work together, particularly for those provinces that would be disadvantaged by measures that we take. For example, if we decide that we're going to stop sending potash to the United States, then the other provinces have to compensate Saskatchewan for the loss, and the same would apply to oil and other measures that we might adopt. I think that there are just so many things that we can do to try and pressure the United States to get Mr. Trump to abandon these measures, which are going to lead to devastating unemployment and, you know, potentially instability inside our country. God knows what happens to our currency, savings, retirement, and everything else through these measures that he is proposing. It's really there's so many unstable and unknown factors that we're barely getting the grips on it now. But I think over time we'll come to appreciate how devastating Trump's actions are for Canada, and indeed for the entire stability of the world. Because, you know, it's not just about this, but it's about NATO, it's about the WTO, it's about all of the institutions that maintain sovereignty, justice, and prosperity in the world. And we could see a very different geostrategic world in the years ahead. It could be a world made up of might makes right, and, you know, U.S. high-tech billionaires and Russian oligarchs and apparatchiks dominating the planet, while Canada is subject to all sorts of pressures that we have no control over.
Can I just ask you very quickly, if you have any optimism? I know it doesn't sound like you do, but if Canadians watching that are kind of anxious about all of this, what would you say to them? What would you recommend that people do in terms of something a positive, something that they can do?
Well, I think we have to stick by our values and not allow the United States to convince us that we'd be better off joining a Trump-dominated U.S. And certainly we have to make much more sacrifices to defend our nation. Today, the government announced 3 bases in the Arctic, and I think Yellowknife, Iqaluit, and Inuvik. And, we've got to get ourselves ready to go. Melanie Joly has suggested that we strengthen our alliance with Britain and France, and she even mentioned that those are 2 nuclear powers. Are we at that kind of stage of tension where we need a nuclear assistance to defend ourselves from an increasingly chaotic world, which is potentially being set off by a very chaotic U.S. president?
Charles, thank you. Charles Burton is a senior fellow at Synopsis and former Canadian diplomat in Beijing. Joining me now is Flavio Volpe, the president of Automotive Parts Manufacturers Association. He is also a member of the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-U.S. Relations. Flavio, your reaction?
I mean, this is a series of jump scares and pullbacks, and it's a little bit like what we saw in the first Trump administration in the proposal and counter-proposing themselves. But what we're seeing is this is not Canada and Mexico that made any concessions or asked for carve-outs or begged their way out of these punitive tariffs in this trade war that they started. This is American voices, in this case started by voices in Detroit that said, we run the 3 biggest and oldest American car companies, and you're going to shut down the business within a week. Now, if you want to wear it, that's one thing, but we can't pay for it. And so he pulled back, and then he pulled back for the rest of automotive, and now he pulled back for any goods that are compliant with USMCA. The USMCA is a very detailed matrix. There's still a lot of Canadian goods a lot of Canadian content and goods that are still subject to his tariff action here, in my understanding. And so, even if he's granting an extension, and I guess waiting for us to thank him, there's still Canadians who are affected in this interim, and I think we need to continue to be vigilant and disciplined.
So what is your understanding in terms of the automotive sector? Because that's your specialty. What does this mean for the automotive sector?
Automotive goods in this country, cars and parts and raw materials are integrated with the matrix of the USMCA rules of origin, and that means all of those companies that I represent continue to have tariff-free access to the U.S. In spite of this 2.5 day or whatever it is tariffing. And I guess we're going to do this again in 30 days. But I will say the difference between this 30 days ago and 30 days before that is, I've always said that it'll be American voices, Americans with common cause, even if they're not allies of ours, will stand up and say, what are you doing? What are you doing to markets? What are you doing to the price of goods? What are you doing to the price of money? What are you doing to consumer confidence for investment in this country? And why are you doing it to our partners, who we have no grievances with? That they're the ones that carry the day. They're the ones that are going to have to carry the day. And now, organizations like ours, we inventoried 172 factories, Canadian-owned in the U.S., 26 states, 74 congressional districts, 48,000 employees. We're reaching out to all of them and to those mayors to say, you don't have to care about me in Toronto. Doesn't matter. Or the people that we represent in Windsor and Woodstock. You should care about the people in Muscle Shoals, Alabama, and Lexington, Kentucky, because you're going to put them out of business, and you're going to put them out of work, and they're your constituents. And so we're going to continue hustling that over the next bit.
Flavio, what do you say when we hear the president say it over and over again, basically like, I want everything built here. I want everything, when he says here, in the United States, I want cars built from beginning to middle to end in the United States. It's kind of a 30-day break. Hurry up, move everything to the U.S. If you move to the U.S., You won't be facing these tariffs or these threats of tariffs. What kind of impact is just that having?
Well, first of all, him saying it and it being possible are two different things. I'd like to fly, but I walk. What he's doing is he's creating uncertainty for people and companies that have to make pending investment decisions or future capital planning. But the fact that he continues to go forward and jump back and mess with the rule of law explicitly in that country is making those investors not choose the U.S. over Canada or Mexico. It's they're choosing to continue to wait. And you stand up there with the Taiwanese semiconductor company who had already aggregated a whole bunch of investment that they were going to do in the U.S. and do it as an announcement, so it makes it sound like he caused it. And if that's what we have to do to appease him and his ego while we're waiting for the Americans to wake up and do something about their country, then okay. But you can't move automotive plants in anything less than 5 years. You're gonna have to close a plant, you gotta break the supply lines, you gotta find new supply lines, find a new site, build a new plant, get your multimodal access and your power there, and that's $2.5 billion per plant that you don't have sales against to amortize that cost. These privately traded, privately owned, publicly traded companies that begged him to pull back from the brink, he's gonna bankrupt them before he gets what he thinks he wants.
Flavio, always good to talk to you. This just seems kind of endless, but here we are. Appreciate you speaking with us. Flavio Volpe, thank you. You're looking live at Ottawa. Power and Politics with David Cochrane is up next. He will have the very latest. I'm Andrew Nichols. Thanks for spending a part of your day with us. You're watching CBC News Network.
Hi there, this is Power and Politics. I'm David Cochrane in Ottawa. On day 3 of the trade war, U.S. President Donald Trump hits pause. But just what that pause means isn't exactly clear, as the Canadian economy still braces for whatever comes next.
It's just a modification, short term. We don't need trees from Canada. We don't need cars from Canada. We don't need energy from Canada. We don't need anything from Canada.
The president may be pulling back, but some premiers are still pushing ahead, vowing to hit the U.S. where it hurts, even if this pause amounts to a trade war ceasefire.
He did this before. Remember, he said he'd do it 1 month, 3 days later, a week later, he puts the tariffs on. The only deal is drop the tariffs unconditionally.
We're going to ensure that the Americans understand how pissed off we are. We don't let up until the president takes the threat off the table.
Canada's initial retaliation package of tariffs on $30 billion worth of goods will stay in effect. But the finance minister issued this statement on social media that Canada will not proceed with the second wave of tariffs on $125 billion of U.S. products until April 2nd, while we continue to work for the removal of all tariffs. So that's the state of play, at least until something else happens, which could be at any minute. We're going to try to cut through the chaos as Power and Politics starts right now. Okay, we are standing by to hear from Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc live during the show, but right now we're going to get the very latest from here in Ottawa and from Washington. I'm joined by the CBC's Katie Simpson again tonight, and here in the studio, our chief political correspondent, Rosemary Barton. It feels like we do this show together almost every day. Rosie, Trump's pause, LeBlanc's pause. Well, what's the latest you're hearing from sources here in Ottawa?
Listen, that this does change things materially for a brief period of time, right? This is not the end of things, but at least they have a temporary reprieve. Now, we should tell people so that we understand that when Donald Trump talks about goods being CUSMA compliant or USMCA compliant, falling under the free trade agreement, that would mean you would think a vast number of Canadian products would fall under that agreement. It is not necessarily the case. The White House says, as Katie knows, it's 62% fall outside of the agreement. I'm not sure if that's the correct figure, but it is true that there are some Canadian goods that do not fall under the free trade agreement. In order for them to do that, they have to be wholly or largely produced in the 3 countries that are in the free trade agreement. And they have to apply for rules of origin status. So some companies maybe chose not to do that because it's complex and there's a lot of bureaucracy involved. They would now be able to do that in order to get this reprieve from the 25% tariff.
Right.
That is important. It's substantially different than where we were yesterday, but it is not enough for the Canadian government. As we heard there from Doug Ford, and it's the same position in Ottawa, this is not a negotiation to reduce the tariffs. This is not a negotiation to pause them month after month. This is a negotiation to get rid of them entirely.
Right, because if you don't comply with the free trade agreement we have with the United States, you pay the tariff that is spelled out by under the World Trade Organization standard of most favored nation trading status. That's about 5%, as I understand it. So you might be a small company where it's just easier to take the 5% hit than to go through the hoops and hurdles to comply with CUSMA. They will now kind of be forced to get underneath it.
What it might do, when we were discussing this in the newsroom, is it might force some Canadian companies who do seek components or parts of what they make in a different country, China or India or other places, to seek a source within the continent, within North America. That's possible. But it will mean that a lot of companies that weren't filling out that paperwork, to your point, will now do that in order to avoid this massive tariff.
Okay, so the implications of this are very difficult to understand, in the minutes since we've gotten this information. But Katie, we know there was a phone call yesterday between the president and the prime minister. We know it got colorful, profane, tense, whatever euphemism you want to have there. I mean, what are some of the behind-the-scenes things you can tell us about what's been going on between Canada and the United States?
There was swearing about Canadian dairy. There were swear words about cheese. Not specifically cheese, but generally that's where it got really heated. So I am told, according to a senior Canadian government source, that there were a couple of real flashpoints in the conversation between Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and U.S. President Donald Trump. It was a 50-minute phone call, and it was sort of to try and get to a place where there can be some sort of negotiations when it comes to dealing with these tariffs. The most heated part of the conversation, I am told, came when Donald Trump expressed his deep concern, his frustration and anger with the protections Canada has on access to the dairy market, on Americans, making it harder for Americans to actually sell their products up in Canada. Canada does have some protections in place there. Donald Trump pointed to that as an example of how the United States is not treated fairly by Canada when it comes to trade. And I am told that is where the president used some profanity. I am also told by a senior Canadian government source that the Prime Minister did not return the profanity, but that was one of the flashpoints in that conversation. Another part of the conversation that I'm told was very, very difficult and very, very tense had to do with fentanyl. And that is when Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was presenting the information, the statistics that Canada has collected about the amount of fentanyl that has been stopped by U.S. border agents, pointing to American data to sort of make the point, say, listen, already when this started, Canada, the amount of fentanyl crossing the northern border was less than 1%. Now, since Canada's implemented new measures, doing what the United States has asked Canada to do, those numbers have gone down even further. I'm told, according to a senior Canadian government source, that both Donald Trump and J.D. Vance both push back firmly and say, hey, that seizure information, that data, that's not the metric we're looking at. That's not how we're quantifying this. And then I'm told the Prime Minister said, okay, maybe, but what other information is there when it comes to this, when it comes to sort of tracking fentanyl coming from Canada? And so apparently it was quite heated in that moment. I'm told there was no profanity in that moment, but it was quite heated. I am also told Donald Trump, saying that the conversation ended on a fairly friendly note. The Canadian source agreed that was sort of the tone at the end, leaving things sort of in the negotiating phase, and now we are where we are today.
Okay, but Katie, just on the fentanyl thing, the executive order speaks to a lack of law enforcement and stopping the flow of the drug into the United States. So you would assume seizures and cross-border trafficking would be the metric they would use. We've heard Howard Lutnick and others, the Commerce Secretary, talk about fentanyl deaths. Now, I don't know how you track if a fentanyl death was caused by Canadian fentanyl, fentanyl from Mexico, fentanyl from Asia. Is it the Canadian government's sense that it's the death rate, which is a public health concern inside the United States based on that conversation, that is now the metric, or is it absolutely unclear at this point, like most things, quite frankly?
The goal posts are constantly changing.
Okay.
While the Trump administration legally on paper says this is about fentanyl and illegal immigration, guess what the president has said out loud a number of times, and the vice president himself too. It's about trying to shift business operations to the United States. They want jobs out of Canada, jobs out of Mexico, and they want them in the United States instead. So let's, while the president on paper legally, his advisors get out and say this is a drug war, not a trade war. Guys, this is a trade war. Just so this is a trade war. This is about shift. Like, the president has said it himself. Like, the president keeps saying it himself.
Yeah, and there may be legal challenges on the executive order, so this is why they have to keep mentioning fentanyl, because this will end up in a court somewhere. I'm not sure if that matters, but that's the likely destination for it. So, Rosemary, we have a pause on the Canadian retaliation then. The $30 billion stays in place. That second wave, according to the finance minister, of $125 billion will be delayed until April 2nd. Now, in terms of a concession from Canada, that's about a 6 or 7 day delay, right? Because they announced it on the 4th of March, 21 days of consultation to get to the 25th of March. So, it's a week and a bit that they've decided to hold off on this. I mean, what are the thoughts on the ability to get a full peace agreement here by those dates?
I honestly don't know, but it is encouraging that we at least were able to get to where Mexico got, which is the same thing, this delay of a month. The problem for the Canadian government, and the reason you are not seeing them go any further than where they've gone. We're keeping the $30 billion. We'll keep the other 125 on ice. The reason you're seeing Doug Ford and other premiers not back down is that there are a whole bunch of other dates coming up. The president promised that steel and aluminum was still going to get hit with
on the
tariffs
12th.
next week. He promised that there will be reciprocal tariffs on April 2nd. He said the auto sector is not out of the woods yet, even though they wanted a longer pause. That's it. This is all they're getting. So by no means is this over. And I think that what we're seeing from political leaders in this country today is an attempt to keep the pressure on. Because if Donald Trump made this reversal, it is not just because of a phone call with Justin Trudeau. It is because the markets are tanking. It is because businesses are concerned. It's because he is hearing directly from people who are going to have to lay people off and start paying more for the very things that Donald Trump promised Americans he wouldn't do. So how does Canada do that? I'm not sure. And then how do we do that with a new prime minister sometime next week and possibly in an election campaign as we stare down this next round of tariffs, this next deadline? That's going to be complicated.
It's interesting because we've seen reaction out of the United States, bourbon makers, whiskey makers in Kentucky, Tennessee, saying, because the LCBO, for people who don't understand it, is the biggest bulk buyer of alcohol in the world, and it's a consignment thing, right? So the American liquor that is on those shelves, they don't get paid until it's sold. That's right. And it can't get sold now. And you see the distributors saying, this is a disproportionate response to the tariffs. It's like, well, boo-hoo, like you're coming after the auto sector. So the pain, it may look symbolic talking about liquor, but it matters in industries really important in Republican states.
That's right, and it's also why Doug Ford today said, that's nice, but we're still adding a 25% tariff on energy to some of those states along the Ontario border on Monday. This is not, again, this is not a negotiation for another pause. This cannot be a threat that Canada encounters month after month after month.
Right. Okay. So, Katie, just a final question. The stock markets have been in a pretty steady tumble ever since all of this started. The NASDAQ, I believe, closed in correction today, which is when it's down 10% from a previous high. And that is not a situation you want your markets to be in when you're a president in his 6th or 7th week in power. Any sense that any of that is affecting the larger agenda on tariffs beyond pause, 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 pause?
I think the thinking in Washington right now is that Donald Trump truly believes in tariffs. He sees this as good economic policy. He sees it as a way to rebuild American manufacturing and as a way to also, he thinks, generate revenue, even though he admits himself that it's going to cause a little disruption, and little disruption likely means is the likely reference to the cost of everyday living for Americans is going to get more expensive. Also, all of the uncertainty around this is going to make business life for businesses, and people have to make decisions about businesses. Everything just gets so much harder when there is no certainty and there is no stability. And so those are the sort of deep concerns right now. And something that Rosie sort of pointed out just a short time ago is that, it's not going to come down to one conversation. It's the constant pressure. It's the constant pressure tactic that Canada has really been engaging with ever since before Donald Trump was actually elected, led by Kirsten Hillman, the Canadian ambassador down here, just the constant. What American lawmakers are we talking to? What business leaders are we talking to? And it could be those business leaders, really. Flavio Volpe has been talking about this as well. When the business leaders are complaining to the president, they do have a lot of influence and they do have his ear in some ways. He doesn't want to hear about things being more difficult for them when these companies want to create jobs, these companies want to grow their profit, those kinds of things. And all of this makes it a really difficult situation for anyone to have any stability.
Can I just add one thing that the Prime Minister said today that I thought was astute? And it was the idea that that Donald Trump fundamentally probably doesn't understand a win-win scenario, because his business in real estate is win-lose, and that's how he approaches deals. Whereas in this case, in governing and protecting citizens, it is about win-win. So how can they get him to shift his thinking on that front or convince him that we'll both come out ahead? I don't know, but I thought that was an important distinction that he made at his press conference.
Yeah, job losses, stock market chaos, and strained relationships is not great economic policy between nations, but here we are. Okay, Katie Simpson and Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton, always appreciate it. We're going to continue our coverage of this trade war, because as we were just saying, the U.S. has delayed tariffs on Mexican and Canadian goods under the USMCA. And as it stands, Canada's exemption would last until April 2nd. But with the uncertainty all of this brings, Canada's leaders look to rally support from both sides of the American aisle. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz posted a photo of his conversations with Ontario and Manitoba's premiers last night, saying while the president may not value the partnerships that contribute billions of dollars to our economy, Minnesota does. Manitoba Premier Wab Kinew joins me now. Premier, it's good to see you again. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thanks for having me back.
The federal government is pausing phase 2 of its response in the tariff retaliation because of this move by the president. But some premiers, they're going ahead no matter what because they say they're kind of tired of the chaos. What are you going to do in Manitoba?
Well, yeah, tired of the chaos, just like everyone else in Canada and probably across the U.S. as well. So, yeah, we're going to maintain these responses that we've had to the Trump tariffs. So the liquor from the U.S., it's going to stay off the Liquor Mart shelves here in Manitoba. And we've also rolled out some supports for business, so specifically a tax deferral on those provincially collected business taxes. We just want to keep cash in businesses so that they can keep people working, keep those jobs in our community. And even though Donald Trump may have hit the pause button from his perspective, this April 2nd deadline, that's not good for us. That's not good enough. We need to see these tariffs completely removed. We can't just have a 30-day pause and then do this all again. So while we're waiting for more clarity and hopefully, the president finding an off-ramp for this situation that meets his needs, we're going to keep those supports in place for business as well.
Mélanie Joly, when speaking yesterday, the Foreign Affairs Minister, she called this a psychodrama. She said we can't go through this psychodrama every 30 days. How would you describe the fits and starts that we're in with the United States right now?
Well, I think a lot of people are feeling whiplash. It's almost like, that ancient video game Pong, where we're just going back and forth from left to right. But for a maybe more contemporary audience, I think everybody is familiar with how Donald Trump operates. We saw it through his first term in office. We're seeing it through the first weeks of his second time in the administration here. And the big thing for us is when we as a country are going up against a larger opponent, we just need to use our leverage. And I think one of the really important ways that we have leverage is by sticking together as Canadians. So all the provinces moving forward to ensure that liquor stays off the shelves. That's really, really important. And then, of course, when we look at the other non-tariff measures that we have, if we can move in a unified fashion, if we can push back together from coast to coast, that's really helpful.
The disruption of this, we spoke with Susan Holt, the Premier of New Brunswick, the other day, and she talked about just how trade exposed New Brunswick is. Like 92% of its goods and exports go to the United States. I mean, what's the vulnerability and the effect of all of this in Manitoba?
Well, Manitoba, like pretty much every province, is a trading province, and the U.S. is our most important trading partner. But it's also cultural. And I'm sure Canadians across the country agree with this too. Like here in Manitoba, people love to do cross-border shopping for a weekend, right? And so whether we're going to North Dakota, some of those closer destinations for a weekend of shopping, or maybe we're going to the Twin Cities in Minnesota, Minneapolis and St. Paul to check out a concert or an NFL game. This is just part of who we are and who we have been growing up in Manitoba. And so really, this is causing not just a big disruption when it comes to trade, but it's really fundamentally upending a lot of the things that Manitobans have taken for granted. And I think like a lot of Canadians, we're seeing a lot of people here who are upset and angry. Outside at our legislature, we draped a huge Canadian flag. Thank you to the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, by the way, for lending that to us. And people have been stopping all week to take photos and selfies in front of it. Just that feeling of Canadian pride and wanting to stick together and find ways to shop local, buy Canadian, and just rally around the flag, quite literally, is a good sign through all this turmoil.
So Doug Ford has said he's going to go ahead with the 25% surcharge on the electricity that Ontario sends to 1.5 million customers in the United States. I know Manitoba Hydro exports electricity to the U.S. What are you going to do there?
Yeah, we're looking at our export contracts. We are reviewing those things, signed in order to say that Hydro needs to check both the export contracts and those things that are up for renewal. Of course, we got two buckets just to get into the weeds here for a quick second. We got firm contracts that are in place, but then we also sell on the spot market, right? And so that's without a long-term contract, just like if we have extra power available. So we're taking a look. Of course, I've been talking to Premier Ford and, checking in with him with the approach there. For us, again, this idea of leverage. When we're confronted with a bigger opponent, we have to use those areas where we have leverage. That 10% on energy and critical minerals, that shows you that that's a sensitivity for the U.S. And so, again, we don't like this April 2nd deadline still hanging over our heads as a potential date for more tariffs. So yeah, we are looking at hydroelectricity exports. Yesterday, I spoke to Governor Tim Walz. I'm sure most of your viewers remember him from the campaign last year. Again, and we had a conversation about energy. And the message to him is, Governor, we love the cross-border shopping. We love your state so much. We're both hockey jurisdictions in the same division, by the way, racing for the playoff. But again, we've got to stick up for ourselves. We've got to look for our economy. And, I think, Governor Walz was very understanding and gracious and certainly opposes the tariffs. So I thank him for that. But yeah, our province is definitely taking a close look at hydroelectricity exports so long as President Trump has these tariffs threatened. Again, if he removes the tariffs entirely, then hey, we can go back to exporting baseload power. And then in this age of AI, baseload power is very, very valuable.
So when you talk about looking at your hydroelectricity, the firm power, these are your long-term contracts, multi-year sort of, are you looking at getting out of those or changing those, or is it just maybe not sell on the spot market to the U.S. and try to find Canadian customers?
Well, for now, we're just taking a look. We're reviewing. Right. So there's no specific announcement that I'm making on that front. And from my perspective, I want to be in the business of exporting electricity to the United States. I would love to have other provinces too, by the way. I would love to have really strong long-term contracts that benefit us by driving economic activity, that benefit our neighbors by helping them to either access more low carbon baseload power or help them to expand the data centers and AI industries they're pursuing. All those things would be a win-win for us, and we would love to pursue. But so long as the president is dangling this threat of tariffs over our country, we are going to keep the tools in our toolbox that we know are effective in providing leverage for us. And so we are going to take a close look, and we're going to, be very judicious and smart. We're talking about big numbers here. We're talking about hundreds of megawatts, thousands of megawatts. We're talking about billions of dollars. So we're not going to move rashly. But again, given the nature of the threat from the president, we do have a responsibility to Manitobans and to the Canadian economy to ensure that we're sticking up for ourselves, while, of course, our first and foremost responsibility is to protect jobs here at home.
Final question, Premier, because I got to let you go. We're 6 weeks into this presidency. Do you think Canada has the stamina for another 46 and a half months of this?
Yeah, I think long after Donald Trump leaves office, we'll still be Canadians, we'll still be Manitobans, we'll still be the true North, strong and free. So again, not to say it's going to be easy, not to say we're not going to be in for more of that game of Pong or the ups and downs, but the reality is this: we are going to get through this period. And one of the defining things about us, maybe that's the fact that Mike Myers has become a national icon again over the past week, is that we have a sense of humor. So let's keep that good nature, that sense of humor. Again, it's a very, very serious threat. We're not joking when it comes to jobs. We're not joking when it comes to electricity. That's very, very serious. But along the way, if we're getting chirped, let's chirp back. And let's have a smile on our face for our fellow Canadians at the same time.
Well, Premier Rob Canoe, we appreciate you chirping here on the show. And by the way, I'm old enough to get the Pong reference. I'm going to have to explain it to my kids when I get home, though. Thank you for being here, sir.
Thanks so much.
Okay, so at this hour, both Canada and the U.S. are taking a step back from this all-out trade war. The U.S. president says he's delaying tariffs on most Canadian goods, some Canadian goods, all Canadian goods, who knows, until April 2nd. And Canada's finance minister issued this statement on social media that Canada will not proceed with the second wave of tariffs on $125 billion of U.S. products until April 2nd, while we continue to work for the removal of all tariffs. Well, the minister who sent that tweet, Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, joins me now. Minister, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, David. Thanks for having me on the show.
How would you describe where things stand with what Donald Trump did today? Is it your understanding that the vast majority of the economy is now sheltered from this 25% tariff, or do some companies have some work to do?
Probably both, David. The president, I've had a number of conversations with Secretary Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, on the weekend, twice today, a few times yesterday. What they decided to do is to remove the application of their 25% tariffs on everything other than energy, which was at 10%, as you know, on goods that are compliant with the U.S., Canada, Mexico Free Trade Agreement. So it's a complicated document around the rules of origin in a manufacturing context. Bottom line, David, is that the vast majority of Canadian exports to the United States are or can quickly be USMCA compliant. So that will, we hope, take a lot of pressure off a number of sectors. But it's not the end of the road. We've, and I said to Secretary Lutnick again today that, okay, in exchange, as you noted, we would not impose tariffs, 25% tariffs on the further $125 billion of U.S. imports into Canada. We would push that by 9 days to that April 2nd date. Hopefully we're lining up a conversation and a discussion with the Americans that's much more coherent in the sense it's not this week, it's this sector of the economy. Next week, it's steel and aluminum tariffs, for example. So my conversation with Secretary Lutnick today was, okay, Howard, this is an important first step. We haven't taken the $30 billion of tariffs that we've, or the 25% on $30 billion of imports into Canada. We have not lifted that because we want to get to a position that we were in 2 weeks ago where there are no tariffs applied to the trade between Canada and the United States. It's a first step. It's an important step, but we're not at the end of the road, and we're going to continue to do what's necessary, David, to ensure that all of these tariffs are removed. I'm hopeful that next week we can get by the steel and aluminum conversation, but we're going to come up to the April 2nd deadline, which President Trump has set up as sort of a reciprocal global tariff decision.
Okay, there's a lot there I want to go through, but just help me reconcile this. You say most Canadian industries are compliant or can quickly be compliant with the USMCA, with CUSMA, so they get around these tariffs. The White House is saying 62% of the imports from Canada to the United States are not compliant with CUSMA. How did they get that number? Explain to me how we get there when we have continental free trade.
So again, we're working with U.S. officials to get precision on that. Some businesses, David, will decide not to do the paperwork to be certified as USMCA compliant and will instead go with a tariff rate that applies to the most favored nation status. This has evolved. These are practices in different sectors that have evolved. I was told by Finance Department officials that those businesses or sectors that may have decided to pay 2.5% tariff as a most favored nation status, or some tariffs were zero rated, can quickly do the paperwork necessary with U.S. Customs and Border Protection to get the certification to be USMCA compliant. So that number, we hope, will quickly rise to close to 100%. But that's precisely why, David, this effort isn't over. So the fact that we're working with the U.S., the Trade Department is working with U.S. trade officials now to understand exactly which lines of tariffs will apply, says that this is a situation that's untenable. That's why we did not release the $30 billion of tariff response that the Prime Minister announced Monday. And we've got to get to a much more coherent position where none of these tariffs apply.
Well, coherence would be a good thing, I think, Minister, right? I mean, look, a lot of the...
In everything, David, not just in trade discussions, in your...
I agree. I agree. I'm a very big fan of clear understanding and clear language. And it's clear the premiers agree that they need to keep putting pressure on the United States, right? Doug Ford is going to put a 25% charge on electricity going to Minnesota, New York, and Michigan. Wab Kinew and others are looking at their electricity contracts. All the alcohol is staying off the shelves, and that's a consignment thing, so that's a hit to the U.S. producers. I mean, what does it say? What do you hope you accomplish by keeping the $30 billion there and these extra non-tariff measures at the provincial level in terms of, are they feeling this pain, do you think, Minister? Because that's the key here.
Well, and you're right. We've said all along, David, that ultimately what will, we hope, convince President Trump and his administration to take all of these tariffs off is the damage that they are doing to their own economy. So they're they're the government that decided to do this. The pretext was around border security and a common fight against illicit fentanyl. The facts, I think, bear out a positive story there, but they decided to proceed this week. They've made a change again today. But you're right, I'm encouraged. I spoke to a number of premiers today. I exchanged text messages with Premier Smith, with Premier Moe, with Premier Ford. I spoke to my Premier, Susan Holt. I mean, there's a great deal of unity across the country, not just from first ministers or different orders of government, but more importantly from Canadians. The airport today in Moncton, David, people stopped me to say that they were really happy that the country was standing up in the face of this American attack on our economy. I think that motivates all governments, and I hope business people to stand firm. It's not going to be without some incoherence, to go back to that word, or without some economic cost. But the only way we're going to get to a position where all these tariffs are lifted is to continue to take a united and firm position. And I was very clear with Secretary Lutnick that that's what we're going to continue to do. But if there are these openings to ensure that some important parts of the Canadian economy can get some relief, then of course we're going to ensure that that's the case. But we're not going to stop this pressure. And the premiers, I heard your interview with Premier Canoe, these are perfect examples of what we'll continue to do, I think, as a country until we get to that position where there are no tariffs.
Look, I understand you want to mitigate where you can while seeking the more perfect and permanent solution to this, but I don't know if you were part of the call between the President and the Vice President and the Prime Minister where they talked about fentanyl. Things got quite heated, but you know, the seizures are not the metric they're using, apparently. They want to focus on deaths. I mean, what is your sense of what you need to do in that, or is fentanyl just totally the pretext, and this is really about forcing manufacturing to go to the U.S., because we have the Treasury Secretary out today talking about big incentives for people to invest in factories and relocate there.
Yeah, and I had, I think, an encouraging conversation on Monday with Secretary Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, around, for example, what can Canada, the United States, and Mexico do together to deal with certain Chinese products that can be dumped below cost into Canada or the United States or Mexico. It's a non-market economy that can have price distortion effects in Canada or in the United States or in Mexico. And what can we do as a common North American group to deal with threats like China? So there are some positive signs there. But you're right, David, this uncertainty has already had an impact on investment decisions that Canadian businesses are making, that investors would be making. That's why it's a corrosive sort of way to proceed in building a thriving economy in Canada or the United States. Ultimately, we're convinced that President Trump will see that, and the stock markets have shown that. I mean, there are, pick whatever indicia you want. It hasn't been economically a very successful week. Problem is, if this continues, there are obviously costs on the Canadian economy as well. So that's why we'll continue to do with premiers and business leaders what's necessary to get us to a position where none of these tariffs are applying.
They speak openly from the White House podium and in other places about the desire to see the auto sector move to the United States. Do you think it is a real possibility that Canada could lose, if not all, a significant portion of its auto industry to America?
No, I don't think that's a possibility at all. I mean, one has to discount the political rhetoric that can come in an Oval Office news conference, or as you say, some spokesperson at a podium in the White House, from the economic reality that we have an integrated auto industry in Canada. Canada is a competitive, productive partner for the United States auto industry. The auto parts business is critical to the success of the U.S. industry. This industry has been integrated and grown together for decades. You can't unscramble the omelet one morning because you decide, you know what, you want to have a fried egg or a boiled egg. You made the omelet. You can't turn it into eggs over easy. It's not going to happen like that. And my conversations with Premiers Ford, Premier Legault, and others, they are very much concerned around this sort of pressure that the Americans are bringing on those key industries to the country. And we'll continue to work with them to ensure that that kind of rhetoric is exactly that rhetoric. It doesn't turn into reality.
This persistent cycle of chaos, though, as you say, it raises the anxiety level, uncertainty over investment. We've already seen job losses in the aluminum sector in Quebec, for example. We have been reassured by your government there will be supports for workers. The premiers were apparently told things like waiving the waiting period for EI, extending job sharing, looking at tax deferrals. We've not seen anything publicly and with detail, though, from your government on this. Do we just have to wait for that? Like, when are we going to get some clarity in terms of what workers can count on, what businesses can count on, because they need to start crunching some numbers in the face of all of this?
So I think very soon, David, and you've identified, I was on the call that the Prime Minister had with the premiers the day before yesterday. The days sort of meld together now. And you're right, as the finance minister, I can assist with the liquidity for businesses by using federal crown corporations, the Business Development Bank, Export Development Canada. I can defer certain tax installments that businesses would make to give them more working capital. My colleague, Stephen McKinnon, has the ability to, in employment insurance, for example, you identified job sharing, making it more easier for long tenured workers. All of these things are available, and I would think very quickly, i.e. in the next day or two, those details will come out. But the Prime Minister laid out for the premiers a series of supports, and that's just the beginning of what we'll do. Those are the immediate supports that we can put in place, hoping that this circumstance doesn't last for weeks and months. But if we're in a circumstance where we're still in this kind of uncertainty weeks from now, then the government will be prepared to take further steps.
Okay, weeks from now, all of this, just as a final point, Minister, this moves beyond your party's leadership race and presumably a transition to a new Prime Minister. Now, I know you're a longtime friend of Justin Trudeau's and a loyal minister to Justin Trudeau. The president is taking shots at him today on social media. Secretary Bissent called him a numbskull. You know, that is what it is. But there is going to be a reset of some sort at some point next week, right? With the change in the leadership of the party and then presumably the government. What's your sense of how that could affect these conversations with the United States and the ability to get some sort of a resolution before April 2nd that can maybe put this all to bed?
So I think the work will absolutely continue, David. You're right. We'll have a new Prime Minister designate on Sunday evening, and he or she will undertake a transition and be sworn into office in the days that follow. If you look at what the leadership candidates, all four of them have been saying in terms of taking a strong position against this unnecessary American attack on our economy, I'm very confident that the person who becomes Prime Minister at this time next week or whenever the transition happens will be in a position to work with the premiers and to maintain very much that pressure. He or she will decide how they want to organize the government, of course. But again, if you have 13 other First Ministers who are so united and so supportive of the Government of Canada working with them to resist this American pressure, I think we should be very confident that if we can get to a position by early April where this is behind us, that's exactly what will happen.
I just wonder, though, Minister, Donald Trump makes things very personal. And there's a long history between your government and him in the first administration and now. Is the bad blood, between, or the shared history between the president and the prime minister, is that playing a role in all of this? Is this something that is making it harder, or maybe even making it easier because they know each other so well?
So again, I'm not a psychiatrist, David. I don't imagine what motivates people. My conversations are with Secretary Lutnick and Secretary Bissent, the Treasury Secretary, and frankly, they're very businesslike. They're cordial, constructive. I mean, these conversations, they're not. There's no personal animosity whatsoever. You're right. President Trump practices politics the way he does. We're going to remain focused on the work that Canadians want us to do to strengthen our economy. So the personal stuff we can just drive by and focus on the work that Canadians want us to be focused on.
Okay. Finance Minister Dominic LeBlanc, thank you for being here. I think the next tariff crisis is Wednesday of next week, so hopefully you can come back and talk about it.
Well, good news is I'll be in Ottawa Sunday. Maybe I'll see you at the Liberal leadership announcement.
I think there's a pretty good chance of that, so we may want to talk to you that day as well. Thank you,
I look forward to it.
Minister. Good to see you.
Have a great evening. Thanks, David.
Thank you, sir. Well, U.S. President Donald Trump says he is pausing his tariffs on Canadian goods, some of them, all of them, who knows, until April 2nd. And while it's a relief, it's only temporary. Even as Trump signed the executive order today, the president continued to rail against Canadian goods.
I'll tell you what's a high tariff nation is Canada. We don't need trees from Canada. We don't need cars from Canada. We don't need energy from Canada. We don't need anything from Canada. So where we can be self-sustaining, which is in most things. Look, we have more oil and gas than anybody.
Well, one Canadian city that is extremely vulnerable to this trade war and to Trump's tariffs is St. John, New Brunswick. And St. John Mayor Donna Reardon joins me now. Mayor Reardon, thank you for being here. Thank you for waiting patiently while we got to speak to the finance minister there. We appreciate you doing that.
My pleasure.
The Canadian Chamber of Commerce says that St. John tops the list as the Canadian cities that will be hurt the most by tariffs. How worried are you with what's going on? What does it mean for your city and your people?
Well, it's absolutely a concern for St. John when you look at the export and where we are with that. So everyone is concerned in St. John. We're taking this very seriously. It's difficult for us because we can't really make any plans because, as you just mentioned, the plans change, the tariff du jour changes day to day. We don't know what's going on from 1 hour to the next with this whole situation. So it makes it very difficult to plan for this going forward.
Well, what is it about the specifics of the economy in your city that makes you so vulnerable to what Donald Trump is doing? Like, what are the core industries that exist there in the businesses and the structure of it that makes you acutely threatened by this?
Well, we have the largest oil refinery in the country is located in St. John, and it's producing about 325,000 barrels of crude a day. So that's huge. We also have a huge aquaculture industry here. And we also have the lumber industry here. We have say breweries here. We have a lot of industry here. We have about 5 or 6 headquarters are in St. John. So there is quite a bit of industry here. It's the home base for many of them. Now, a lot of those global companies would have industry all around the globe and would probably have business in the U.S. I don't know how tariffs will impact that. So that's the other risk for us. Will that impact them or will that not impact them? The other thing that we do have, though, is we have 3 Class 1 railways, and we have a rail that goes all the way down through to Mexico. So, is Mexico a potential bigger trading partner for us as well? It could be. Would tariffs be applied if goods travel through the States? Who knows? Right now it's no. But it could be yes tomorrow. So it's an interesting situation as we go forward.
So you have many of the things that Donald Trump says he doesn't need from Canada, but which Americans buy in abundance from Canada, which speaks to the inconsistencies of this entire situation. I mean, you heard what Dominic LeBlanc had to say. You've seen this pause and the ceasefire, I guess, in this trade war. I mean, how reassured are you that at least it's been pushed off and talks will continue at maybe finding a larger solution?
Well, I think what I see and what I hope for is that this whole scenario with Donald Trump has exposed our vulnerability. And so I think at the end of the day that we need to look at that vulnerability and see how can we change that. So we're looking at how do we create that interprovincial trade? Do we strengthen that? The number that's been put out is that would increase, money within the country by $200 billion. If that's the case, then we need to get onto that ASAP. That needs to happen right away. We need to increase our export market. We need to diversify. We already know that. We need to, we have lots of natural resources here. Should that be developed? That's more economic development. Should that be supported? And the other big thing is how do we invest in the trade enabling infrastructure? So your trade corridors across the country, we should be looking at, putting our money there. I don't think we can ever sit and relax again with this situation. I think our relationship is broken with the U.S. We've had a great relationship for many years with them. We've traded with them. We all travel back and forth to their country, etc. For years, we took our kids down to Maine to ski every March break. But that stopped for a lot of Canadians. And I think we realize how at risk we are now. You've got someone who just murdered your NAFTA agreement the other night. Isn't that a signed document? We talk about contracts, but that's gone pretty much. So, how do we how do we work within that structure with Trump at the lead down in the States? I don't think it can be done. I think we need to do our own thing. I think we need to move on. As I've said before, we're breaking up with the US. We should stick with that. Talk is cheap. We've had so much of it going on in these last few days. I'm like Dominic LeBlanc. I can't remember which day it is. They're all running into one another with all of the talk that's been going on, the changes that have been going on. You know, all of these resources that Trump talks about that he doesn't need. It's just like when anyone goes to the tap and they turn on their water. They don't wonder where their water comes from. They don't wonder how much water's there or anything. They don't know anything about it. They just know they have it. So he has that right now, and that's great. And can he pivot from that, from 325,000 barrels a day? What is the pivot on that, and how long will that take him to pivot from that? So that's, you know, and what about all the seafood restaurants down there? They all love, all the fancy ones love to put on there at North Atlantic, Canadian Atlantic, you know, fish products where they have mussels from PEI and lobsters from Nova Scotia and New Brunswick. What's going to happen with all of that business down there? So it just seems so unreasonable, unrealistic. It doesn't even seem like it could possibly happen. So I don't know what's going to happen with all of this. It's just been ridiculous.
Donna Reardon, I get your frustration, your confusion, and because I share it. You know, it's where we are. I never thought we'd be having conversations about this, about David. The United States, but here we are. Look, I want to thank you for your time. That's the Mayor of St. John, New Brunswick, Donna Reardon. Good to see you, Mayor Reardon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for being here. Okay, here we are. So how does Canada get itself out of this 1-month pause whiplash, as you just heard the mayor talking about? The Power Panel is standing by with their take on President Trump's moves this week and what Canada should do next.
One for Canada, one for Mexico.
Yes, sir.
They've been in the news lately, haven't they? It's just a modification, short term, because I didn't want to hurt the American. It would have hurt the American car companies if I did that.
3 days into the trade war, President Trump has announced a change of heart, sort of. He's pausing his 25% tariffs on most Canadian goods, but just until next month, so the threat remains ever present. And Trump continues to dangle other threats and other dates for other tariffs. This reprieve comes 24 hours after Trump spoke on the phone with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and it was a call that sources say contained profanity on Trump's part.
I can confirm that it was a colorful call, and it was also a very substantive call. The focus we have right now is on reducing the impacts of the tariffs. I can confirm that we will continue to be in a trade war that was launched by the United States for the foreseeable future.
The federal government has announced it won't proceed with the second phase of retaliatory tariffs until April 2nd, but its first phase remains in place, and premiers are still moving ahead with their retaliation.
We're going to put a 25% tariff on the electricity that we send down to Minnesota, Michigan, and New York, and it's unfortunate we have to do that because I really have a great relationship with all three governors. I had an opportunity to talk to my friend Governor Walz yesterday. And it's unfortunate, but you know, there's one person to be blamed for that, and that's President Trump. He's created an absolute mess. He's created chaos right now around North America and actually around the world.
My message for the Prime Minister, for my colleagues across the country, and it's one I'm sure they want to deliver to me too, is stand strong. We are not going to accept these continual threats, this continued uncertainty. We're going to stand up for Canadians. This is unacceptable. And we're going to ensure that the Americans understand how pissed off we are, how unified we are, how committed we are to working as a country to stand up for each other and our own independence on our own 2 feet. And I say we don't let up until the president takes the threat off the table.
Okay, it's time to bring in the power panel to talk about all of the developments today. Satya Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Tim Powers is a former strategist for Conservative parties. Andrew Thompson is a former NDP cabinet minister in Saskatchewan. And here with me is Karleen Verheyen, a former chief of staff to Liberal cabinet ministers. What a day, which I seem to say every day, Andrew, these days. It's week 6, 46 and a half months to go. Andrew, where do you think we are right now in this trade dispute? You're in Washington, D.C. right now, as I understand it. Am I correct? What's going on the other behind enemy lines in this trade war?
Well, I'm down here with a group of manufacturers and folks looking at supply chains on behalf of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. We're meeting with officials and trying to get a sense as to what exactly the Americans are thinking. It's pretty clear they are still trying to read the tea leaves down here, too, as to what exactly President Trump is up to. There seem to be a number of different agendas at work that are not always synced up. Certainly, you know, the tech bros want the tariffs to try to reduce taxation. They want that revenue. We know that there are folks like the Commerce Secretary and others that are wanting to, have another go at USMECA, at COSMA, to have a go at the free trade agreements to try and level out, gain back pieces that they lost before. And then there are folks like Peter Navarro who are absolutely focused on whatever they can do to address the threats that they are seeing Canada and Mexico being weak on in relations with China. And that's particularly Chinese involvement in the supply chains. So there's a lot of pieces colliding here. I mean, you had some conversation with Dominic LeBlanc about how much the personal animosity between the president and Prime Minister Trudeau plays into it. That certainly seems to be part of it. But it's also, I think, an understanding of two things that have resonated as a result of Canada's response. Americans do see us united, and I think that the White House has realized that the nonsense spewing from the president about the 51st state has worked against American interests on this. It has brought Canadians together in a way that they don't think they fully expected. And the second thing that I think is fairly, becoming fairly evident is that the pain points are there. Now, I don't know that it's what Doug Ford's doing to a bunch of blue states, but certainly the pressure that we're seeing on the automotive manufacturing sector, the manufacturers themselves, the question around agriculture, what the impacts are there, even the minor things like removing bourbon off the shelves that's affecting red state employees, is starting to crack through. So, those pieces are all coming to a reality. But the question is, what's the end game? And I think that's what we're still waiting to see. A lot of people believe that the end game is, in fact, getting Canada back to the table to make concessions on lumber, to make concessions on dairy, to make concessions on aluminum and steel.
It seems pretty clear, Shachi, it's not about fentanyl, really, because, and I asked Andrew Fury about this, and he said he didn't do enough psychiatry in his medical training to understand what the president really wants here. But, he keeps threatening, delaying, re-threatening, re-delaying. And Melanie Joly called this a psychodrama, but here we are with another détente and another chance to mitigate the damage on everyone here.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister called it Thursday, just another day. I thought it was, as lines go, that was a pretty good line. I think it's akin to riding the teacups. I've heard the roller coaster analogy, but this is really like you're spinning and then you're spinning back the other way, and everyone's feeling quite nauseous at this point. But, interestingly, I want to pick up a little bit on what Andrew talked about, because we see that in the data. 4 weeks ago, Americans were almost completely checked out of this issue, maybe a handful had heard about the 51st state thing, but they were not, this wasn't breaking through in terms of the U.S. news cycle or about what they might have been hearing or seeing on social media.
It seems to be now. Yeah.
It is now, to the point where I'm sitting here in Vancouver this afternoon, David, and there is a delegation from the Seattle Chamber of Commerce, 50 people, and they look stricken. And they are talking to me saying, what can we do to stave this off? This is terrible for our, not just our border communities, which, like Detroit, Windsor, here in Metro Vancouver, there's a bunch of Washington state border communities that are entirely dependent on Canadian shoppers and on the Canadian knock-on economy, that are very, very worried and concerned. And really, so much of this, I think, is going to end up and lie with not what Trudeau says to Trump or not what a delegation says in Washington from Canada, because we've been seeing the repetition of that over and over again. And yes, it's on, it's off, it's on, it's off again. I don't even know where we are today. However, I think the sense that we're getting is that the message to affected Americans has to be, don't call Congress or don't call your congressperson or your senator or your representative and say, back off of Canada. It's actually back off of the American consumer. You talk about electricity, you talk about softwood lumber, you talk about other commodities that we are selling to the United States in many cases, not all cases, but in many cases, we're price makers on those sales, not price takers. They have to settle for what we set the price at. And if we can actually get our act together in terms of diversifying and selling our commodities on other markets, this does get much more expensive for the American public and the American consumer. And you kind of get the sense now, David, that this isn't a 30-day, this is just going to be 30 days plus 30 days plus 30 days, on again, off again, and that chaos, that drama, that uncertainty, none of that is good for Canadian business, but maybe the one thing that Canadian business can take away from this is starting to plan more diversified sales lines in order to mitigate from this chaos.
But, Tim, this snip, snap, on, off, it's, it is exhausting. It is confusing. It's interesting to watch the U.S. media cycles now that when the Canadian delegations were down talking to Democratic lawmakers, there's some criticism saying, why are you talking to them? You should talk to Republicans. The people on the cable news networks in the U.S. right now are the Democratic lawmakers making the message clear for Canadians and, and then also the consumers coming out. I mean, where do you think things are right now?
Well, let me give you another analogy. It's like ping pong. The ball's here, the ball's there. It keeps going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. What's the purpose of it? Never like the game. No offense to ping pong players, but it's here or there. It's everywhere. But
I think they call it table tennis, Tim. Table tennis.
Oh, well, sorry.
That's the sober version. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I didn't say beer pong. I said ping pong, though I may need the beer to get through it all. But look, David, what's fascinating to me, where I am today, so Shachi's in Vancouver, I'm in St. John's, you were just here, how pervasive this story is everywhere. It's dominating local news because the reason so many Canadians are aggrieved, if Newfoundland is any example, Labrador is any example of this, it's being talked about in terms about how it affects us. And to Shachi's point, when Americans start to feel that here, there's a palpable anxiety here and in other places that I've not seen since COVID. And people are fatigued and they're worried and they're concerned, but we need to push it back across the border so that they feel it at that human level. And you hear some of that. You hear some of that from relatives and families that are there, that this you can't keep this pace up. It's just not possible to keep up. The man is 78, 79. At some point, one assumes it's going to wither, or his own people are going to say, sir, enough is enough.
Well, sir, yeah, that's how all the stories start. Carleen, what are your thoughts on this? I mean, there is the persistent fight with Canada on tariffs. There's a larger agenda of various comments and policies that are alienating traditional allies. Where do you think things are now that there is this April pause?
Well, I think what's clear is we're certainly not out of the woods. We can maybe pause to take a breath, but I think what the government did that I was happy to see was that they indicated that, well, they will extend that consultation period for an extra week on the second tranche, the bigger tranche of retaliatory tariffs, that what that's really doing is just giving them the opportunity to use this next month as a negotiating period, a time when they will likely seek to apply more of the pressure that seems to have worked here, whether it's lobbying Republicans and Democrats in the states that have influence, whether it's allowing, I think, the economic impacts in the states to continue to take hold in the way that we're seeing. I mean, the markets have not even recovered since Trump announced his decision. In fact, I think they actually went down a little further toward the end of the day today. So I think that was wise. I also think it's what Canadians want to see. The unity that's already been spoken to is really remarkable. And the Prime Minister took a time out of his press conference this morning to be really deliberate about saying that what got Canada to this point so far in the negotiation and in this ongoing trade war that we didn't start with Donald Trump. Yes, it was the work that elected leaders did, but fundamentally it was powered by that sense of unity and patriotism that Canadians have. That's what allowed the political leaders to have the momentum that they did to keep pushing on this way. And that sort of sounds a little bit warm and fuzzy and whatever, but I actually think that he's right. I think that there is something to that. I think Donald Trump underestimated the Canadian people, and I think we got a little bit of our confidence back. We're remembering that we're the 7th largest economy in the world. We're the biggest supplier of raw goods to the U.S. We can mess with these guys if we want to, and we would probably rather not have to, but we're in a place now where we need to, and it's what we're doing, and it's working.
But, you know, Andrew, there is something larger than just our trade fight with the U.S. happening, right? Like, J.D. Vance has, dismissed the military contributions of allies, saying, oh, these countries haven't fought a war in the last 30, 40 years. Trump suggested today NATO wouldn't come to our defense when the only time Article 5 has been invoked was when NATO came to the Americans' defense after 9/11. And I was on NPR last week talking to them about the Canadian reaction here and talked about, being in Newfoundland when all the planes came, after September 11th and everybody went off to fight in the war in Afghanistan, the U.S. defense, and no one sent the Americans a bill, right? And now it's become this big transactional thing, and it seems like the Western world is just turning away from them because they're being pushed away from them.
Well, certainly they're being pushed away. I mean, it was framed up interestingly by an academic today that we were, not exactly an academic, I mean, he was, but he had a lot of business experience and government experience also, who said that one of the things we needed to understand is that the American mentality is based around litigation. The Canadian mentality is based around negotiation. Our great success is how do we kind of get together so we're all moving in the same direction. The Americans are, at least the Republican version of that is much simpler. It is, did you meet your commitment to NATO? We haven't. Did you meet your commitments under the trade agreements? Mostly. And I think what we've got to start doing is understanding that there is a different of psyche in terms of how that transactionality works within the Americans versus how we see it. And we are going to have to start paying more attention to the dotted I's and the crossed T's in a lot of these things. That transactionality is a big part of what the Americans are wanting to push into the system now because they believe they can control the system that way. I don't know, the piece to me that's still very much up in the air is what impact, if any, Europe going off and revitalizing itself, reorganizing itself, becoming a player again actually does. We haven't seen that since the end of the Second World War. What does happen if we have a united Europe moving in one direction, and what does that mean for the Western world order?
Yeah, and Shachi, here is Canada kind of historically been a hinge between the two. That hinge, I don't know if it's broken, rusted, seized, where it is right now with what's happening with Trump. But, you know, this constant provocation, negotiation, and then delay, you can't count on someone who functions that way, right? So Canada needs to figure it out.
Well, and it's the reason why we're seeing Canadian views of the U.S. now at basically an all-time low, or at least in our lifetime low. I don't think it's ever been as low as 24%. The fact that only 15% of Canadians see the United States as a trusted friend, ally, and partner, whereas 52% of Americans actually feel that way about Canada. But going back to your Europe, the European part of that conversation, you know, there's so many different elements of that, and I don't want to sound too pessimistic, but you know, if Europe, with Russia at the doorstep, Russia, which we tend to think of as degraded and on the way down, their economy's gone nowhere, they haven't been able to take Ukraine despite 3 years, but a lot of help from the West on that front. Russia's still pretty powerful. Russia still has nukes. And so, you know, if we are, the collective we, if Canadians are thinking, or Canadian leaders or governments are thinking, well, Europe's going to be there for Canada, if it comes to a trade-off, if it comes to who do they have to deal with in order to protect their own sovereignty and borders and peace and protection, they're still going to try and find a way to work with Trump or at least appease him. And so I think we should be under no illusions that, you know, we have some power, we have some leverage here, we do have some muscle that we can apply, we do have new friends to make, and I think we also have to have some pretty gut-checking conversations about, you know, who we are prepared to trade with. I think for a long time, Canada has been in a privileged position of saying, we're not going to talk to country X because they don't share our values.
Right.
We're not going to talk to country Y because they don't share the same standards around rule of law, justice, or human rights. I think that this is now maybe, regrettably, I mean, I would prefer to deal with only countries that think like we do and respect the law like we do. But I think we may be running out of choices fairly quickly, and there may be, you know, we may be having to have some conversations around that. I don't know that Europe's going to be there for us.
Well, look, there's who you talk to, there's who you can rely on, and we'll see. I mean, the U.S. is still, you know, the most powerful country on earth, and so you've got to deal with that. But look, the Trump story is one dominant story. The other big story in this country is the transition that's happening at the top of this government, right? That Justin Trudeau, who was out today, he's probably got a week left in his time as prime minister, right? And so he was out today, and he was announcing, you know, an extension of the childcare deal with some of the provinces and territories. And when he was doing that today, he was asked about his legacy, and here's what the prime minister said.
I've made sure that every single day in this office, I put Canadians first, that I have people's backs. And that's why I'm here to tell you all that we got you. Even in the very last days of this government, we will not let Canadians down today and long into the future.
Tim, pretty emotional there by the Prime Minister. And if you look back over the 9 years, 10 years he's been in power, it's been a lot of crises, starting with Trump 1 and now with Trump 2 and COVID and everything in the middle.
Well, conservative heads may pop off, but I'm going to say something nice about Justin Trudeau because, look, he's been prime minister for 9 years, almost 10. You may not like his policies, but you have to admire his commitment to public service. Look at the toll that this has taken on him. His marriage ended over the course of this. He leaving office with low public popularity ratings, though arguably, to be fair to him, he's been very good in the last 2 weeks. We won't really know what the public will think of his legacy for quite a few years, but look, he had a pandemic. He has had Trump 1 and 2, wildfires, all manner of crisis in between. It's harder to lead. It's harder to be a political leader. So you can respect the fact that he's emotional with days to go, and it's hard to transition from leading into whatever his new normal will be. I mean, I wish the man luck. I think for better or for worse, he's given it his all, and thank you, sir.
You know, Carleen, it is remarkable that we are probably a week, 10 days at the most, to Justin Trudeau's departure from the Prime Minister's office, depending on when the transition happens after the vote on Sunday. And it's been so pushed aside because of the frenzy and chaos. Like in my last week on the job, you know, I hope I'm not working like that. You know what I mean?
Well, it's...
They still got your boxes here in St. John's.
Yeah, they do.
When are you going to pick them up?
I think in this particular way, I think being a leader in elected politics is almost a little bit like being a professional athlete, in the sense that you often don't get to write your own ending. You don't get to wrap up your career in perhaps the exact way that you'd like. And when you think about Justin Trudeau and the final arc of his time as a politician, thinking back to that first week of January when he stepped out in front of Rideau Cottage and let everyone know that he had recognized that he was not the person who was going to be able to best lead his party or the country through the next months and years ahead. That came after 9 months of being public enemy number one to many people in his own party. Certainly the vehicle on which Pierre Poilievre was able to rise to these surreal heights of popularity. And then you look at what's happened since that moment, since January 6th. He has had to rise to a challenge that was entirely outside of his control. I think we could argue that in spite of, or perhaps because of the nature of his relationship with Trump, that he's played a role in getting Canada this far without a substantial degree of economic carnage. And so he will be walking away from his political career, his time in public life on Sunday and eventually on Tuesday or Wednesday when a new prime minister is sworn in. I think with the respect and gratitude of perhaps more Canadians than he otherwise would have. And I think it's also sort of a fitting way for him to cap off his career, because he has always thrived in a time of crisis more than any other moment. That's what people really grabbed onto about him in 2015 when there was a real movement, like a moment for change, a movement for change. It was the COVID crisis. It was Trump 1 and 2. So in a way, this is fitting, I think.
Okay, we're tight on time, but I do want to quickly get Andrew and Shachi in, but like 60 seconds each. I mean, Andrew, political careers rarely end happily. You either burn out, you get thrown out, or you get forced out. But what do you make of this last chapter, this postscript that Justin Trudeau has been writing over the last couple of weeks?
Well, I think today what we saw was Justin Trudeau at his best. I mean, this is the part that he does well. He is able to, when he wants to, be a unifying voice and to be able to identify those issues that are critical for our times. That I don't think any of that has ever been really at question. The problems with the government that he ran, are numerous. They're well articulated. One of the things I will say, having been in public office, is that those of us who have served in politics are very fortunate that Canadians are generally very nice and very forgiving. And I think they do look at the person, not just at the record. And I think that there is a degree of thanks that were given to him for the leadership, without forgiving many of the problems that this government has overseen.
Okay, Shachi, I got about 20, 30 seconds.
Okay, so a couple things. First of all, I think reputations and legacies, there's always the hot take, and then, there's the time, the years, the decades at times to maybe rehabilitate or for it to bake. I think the hot take for Trudeau will be that it is, at least in the short term, a divided legacy, where people are willing to say, yeah, you did okay on expanding the social safety net. We liked it when you legalized marijuana. We thought that you did fairly well through the pandemic, as Andrew mentioned, but then there were all these other issues where it was less about the policy that was painfully or terribly unpopular, and more a sense that the government was simply off-tuned to, or not paying attention to, or tone-deaf to the problems of the day, and were not responsive. And I think those will be the bits that he wears on the negative side. But I think you're going to see a pretty divided take on where people stand on him at the end of 10 years.
Okay, we got to leave it there. Obviously, we'll talk more about this with the change coming next week. But we've got to say goodbye to the Power Panel: Shachi Curl, Tim Powers, Andrew Thompson, and Carleen Varayan. But don't you go anywhere. There's still lots more to come right here on this edition of Power and Politics. Just ahead, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith on how her province is retaliating against U.S. tariffs. Plus, Liberals would choose their next leader on Sunday, but registered party members say there are some issues with the online verification and voting system. We're going to talk about that with leadership candidate Karina Gould. And the Power Rankings panel is here. They'll give their picks for who is up and who is down on day 3 of the trade war. U.S. President Donald Trump has given Canada and Mexico some relief on the blanket 25% tariffs. For Canada, the reprieve will be applied for potash and goods that qualify under the Canada-U.S.-Mexican trade agreement. The partial pause will last roughly a month until April 2nd, and it's not exactly clear how all of this reprieve will work. Now, I spoke earlier today to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. This was hours ago. This was before Trump's announcement this afternoon. But I did ask the Premier about the chaos, about the constantly changing dynamic we're dealing with as a country.
I think that the Americans are seeing what I've warned them all along. I mean, this is part of the reason for my diplomacy. I've often said that tariffs are their own punishment, and the Americans are discovering that. They're seeing chaos in their financial markets. The stock market is up, down, all over the place. They had a terrible jobs report out today where most of the jobs lost are actually in the private sector. That's only going to get worse. If Canada is buying fewer products from the United States, you're going to see continued job losses, continued uncertainty, less investment, higher prices. All of that is going to impact American consumers and American businesses. We didn't want that outcome, but they're now beginning to see that when you dishonor these kind of agreements with the integrated markets that we have, it actually is its own punishment, and maybe that'll cause them to do a bit of a climb down.
You know, you very early in this, you were a loud voice on the need to take action on the border and deal with fentanyl and migration as a way of, appeasing Donald Trump to placate his demands to avoid the tariffs. And you've developed your own Made in Alberta plan. But here we are. We're still here. Do you really think this is still about fentanyl? Because they keep talking about moving manufacturing, getting the auto sector to relocate to the United States. Fentanyl may be the reason on the executive order, but do you think it's really the motivation behind all of this for the president at this point?
Well, I think fentanyl is a problem for both of our countries. I think overdosing is a problem, but it's absurd to think that Canada and Mexico are the only countries that have organized crime and cartels and crystal meth labs and super labs for fentanyl. I mean, this is also an American problem. What we've observed, because we now have a stronger border protection on our Coots border, which is our border with Montana, we've seen cocaine, crystal meth coming up from the United States. We know that we've seen seizures of guns coming up from the United States. There's human trafficking. So this is a two-way problem. And the way you deal with a two-way problem is with joint law enforcement efforts, not trying to make one country bear all the blame for the carnage that drugs cause. We know that they're causing carnage in Alberta. That's why we've taken action for 6 years on trying to address it. But I think what we've seen is that the Americans needed some pretext to violate the trade agreement. And so that's part of what we're witnessing here. But now they have to make a choice of whether the economic carnage they're causing to themselves is worth having this kind of erratic response, or whether we just need to get to the table, talk about the irritants, get on with renegotiating a new agreement, and get back to the kind of relationship we've enjoyed for a number of decades.
If it really is just a pretext for violating the trade agreement, do you think it in some ways undermines the seriousness of the fentanyl crisis that we're all dealing with, here in Canada, there in the United States? I mean, it is something that does require serious joint action, and people have different views on what the best way is to deal with it. But using it to provoke a trade war, if your end goal really is the reshoring of manufacturing from your trading partners, seems to undermine the urgency of a crisis that is costing lives.
Well, it certainly doesn't. I mean, we need to put the focus on it. I mean, we've got problems in Canada. We've got a catch and release program. We're not keeping the bad guys behind bars. When they do get found guilty, they're not getting long enough sentences. They are getting released and continuing to cause harm. We're fortunate that we've taken a two-pronged approach, law enforcement as well as dealing with getting people into recovery. And we've seen our overdose deaths go down by 40%. That is the kind of approach that we need to take, is that we need to go after the bad guys, but then we need to support those who are the victims of the bad guys. And that's the kind of conversation we'd love to have with the Americans, but so that they can also take a similar type of approach and make some real action on this. But to think that cutting off all the flow of goods from Canada and Mexico is going to stop every opioid death in America, I mean, it's just not realistic. This is going to be a long-term problem that we have to solve. And why create more problems in the meantime? We know that actually you end up with real problems. When people lose their job, they have despair, that creates its own social problems. So they may actually be making it worse by creating so much chaos in their economy. And we don't want that for them, and we don't want it for us either.
Okay, in our conversation, which again was hours before the pause was announced, Premier Smith also said her province has a trump card to a potential trade war, oil and gas, but says she's not willing to cut the U.S. off from those industries, and she also opposes the application of any export taxes on those goods.
I said it to you before, and I'll say it again. I do not want to harm Ontario and Quebec. Ontario and Quebec need to understand that 100% of their supply of oil and natural gas comes by way of America. And when you try to pull out a hammer of cutting off energy supplies, it could end up cutting off energy supplies to Ontario and Quebec. And I'm just simply not prepared to do that. I don't want to hurt Ontarians or Quebecers. The way you use the Trump card is you say, we have other markets we can sell to. We've already demonstrated with the Trans Mountain Pipeline and the Coastal GasLink that there's a real market internationally for our product. Let's do more of that. Let's build to the north so that our northern friends and Nunavut and Northwest Territories can get their critical minerals out. Let's build to Churchill. Let's do to James Bay. Let's restart Energy East. That's the trump card I'm talking about. Is that now that we have a spirit of cooperation among the premiers, those kinds of projects that have been delayed for 10 years under the Liberal government can now get restarted again. And that's what I would like to do if it looks like the Southern Pathway is closed.
So, but Premier, even if all of these pipeline projects were approved right now, as we speak, we're still talking years and years and years, right, of work to get it there and to open up the market. So in the short term to deal with this immediate crisis, if export taxes were used, which I know you've resisted, and I'm not advocating for this, I just want to have a conversation about it, and the money was used to keep your workers whole, to keep the energy companies whole, to keep Alberta whole, does that then become a viable option, or is there just no way to structure it that would be acceptable to you and the people of Alberta because of the core nature of the industry, and I know the fraught relationship with the federal government?
There is no circumstance that I'm going to allow the federal government to take more money from Alberta so that they can decide how it's going to be spent. So no, an energy tax is absolutely not on.
What if the deal was up front? It all goes to you. It all goes to Alberta, and you can figure out how to deal with it. Because the short-term goal is to inflict as much pain as you can on America, right? And I appreciate there's no perfect solution here. So I'm just curious if you see any kind of a path there.
So you're asking me to talk to a government that for the last 10 years has done everything they can to keep our oil in the ground, net zero power regs, emissions cap, methane cap, ban on exporting our product through off the West Coast, banning pipelines. I just don't think that I've got a good partner there. So no, we already have an equalization program that takes $25 billion a year out of Alberta to distribute to the rest of the country. I'm not going to agree to another equalization program, knowing those dollars won't come back here.
Okay, that was Alberta Premier Danielle Smith speaking with me earlier today. Well, the Liberal leadership contest is set to come to an end this Sunday, with the Liberals getting a new leader and the country getting a Prime Minister designate, at least on Sunday night. Justin Trudeau is spending his final days in office dealing with President Donald Trump.
Your Foreign Affairs Minister yesterday called all of this a psychodrama. How do you characterize it?
Thursday. I've had 10 years of Donald Trump won, historic, once-in-a-century pandemic, inflation crises, war in Ukraine as Russia returns to war in Europe, as the Middle East is facing extraordinarily difficult situations. These have been complicated times. This is the job I signed up for. This is the job I will continue to do until the very last moment I'm doing this job. And it comes with the territory to be steady and strong for Canadians.
The voting to replace Justin Trudeau with one of the four hopefuls vying for his job began on February 26th and will end Sunday at 3 p.m. Eastern. There have been some issues, though. The Liberal Party says 137,000 members have been verified to this point, and more than 115,000 have voted. But it's not all working as intended. Earlier this afternoon, I spoke to Liberal leadership candidate Karina Gould. Ms. Gould, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
What has your campaign's experience been with the verification and voting process with the party? The latest information we have is 137,000 people verified, 115,000 voted, but that's out of the 400,000 that signed up.
Yeah, so look, I'm definitely hearing from folks who have been able to get through the process and who have voted, but we're also, dealing with a lot of people who are having challenges. Like, the process is working, but there is more churn. And so, I would call on the party to extend the verification process by 1 day, because for Canadians and for Liberals, this is a new thing to have your identity verified before you're able to access a ballot. And I think in order to get as many people voting as possible, we want to ensure that they know that they have to get verified ahead of time. Right now, the deadline is tomorrow at 5 p.m. And so I think it would be worthwhile for the party to extend that by 1 more day, just to make sure enough people get verified if they were planning on voting Saturday or Sunday and haven't started the process yet.
Okay, I am by no means an expert on online voting systems and the technical limitations of changing dates and these things, but given that there are challenges with people getting through the verification process, and I've even heard from Liberals who have gotten through the verification process but then received a ballot and there's no candidates on the ballot, so there's a problem there. Is it an easy thing to move it a day, and have you raised this with the party and gotten any kind of response?
Look, I don't know about that. I do put it to the party, and certainly we have raised, many of the challenges with them. The party is, working through it, and oftentimes they're fixing the issue for people. They're not necessarily telling them that it has been fixed, but then when they go back and check for their ballot, it is there. So look, the system is working. It's different for people, and so that's why, my ask of the party is, can they do something to extend that verification process by one day? Because, we know that Canadians often vote on election day, and, Liberals were told they can vote up until March 9th. So let's do everything we can to make sure as many people go through the verification process and are able to cast their ballots by March 9th.
Do you have a sense of the order of magnitude of the challenges here? Is it thousands, tens of thousands? Because the 115,000 who have voted is more than voted in the last leadership in 2013, though still only a little over 25% of those who signed up. How big is the problem? Do you have a sense of the scale?
Honestly, David, I really don't, because we're hearing from people, on a one-off basis. But I can say that, we are hearing from a consistent number of people. We are able to help them usually, and we're able to help them with assistance from the party. And oftentimes it's, just having someone at Canada Post do the verification as opposed to the electronic version that helps things move forward. But I do think, because this is different, because there are additional layers and extra steps, if it is possible, I really would encourage the party to extend that verification deadline by a day. And I would say that, we don't want to discourage people from voting. I think we always thought that, even though there were 400,000 people who registered, the likelihood of all 400,000 people coming out to vote was probably low. But, I think that we're probably in the ballpark of what was to be expected, but I would expect that number will continue to increase as people know that March 9th is coming up.
I wonder, though, if we do find out thousands, tens of thousands of people were unable to vote because of problems, does that say anything about the integrity of this particular race?
No, I think there is integrity in this race. I just don't want people who are going through the verification process to get frustrated and to not cast their ballot. I mean, at the end of the day, whoever casts their ballot, determines the outcome of the race. I mean, whether it's a Liberal leadership race or whether it's a general election, it's the people who actually go and cast their ballot that, determine the outcome of the election, and that's legitimate. But my message to Liberals who are frustrated is, don't hesitate to reach out to the party, don't hesitate to reach out to my campaign, and, we will help you get through this and make sure that your identity is verified and you can cast that ballot.
Do you have a sense of where this race stands with only a couple of days left? I mean, this is Thursday. In Trump world, it's hard to keep track of what the days are, but the vote is on Sunday the 9th, and the results come out. Do you have a sense of where the race is at this point in time from your perspective?
Well, look, I mean, it's great to know that, over 130,000 people have voted, over 115,000 people have voted, and over 130,000 are registered. So, it's like any election day. It's about getting the vote out. I'm feeling good about the prospects here. I'm feeling very encouraged by the number of people who've reached out to say that they've cast a ballot for me. But we're going to find out on Sunday what that looks like.
Okay, we don't know where things will be by Sunday on the Canada-U.S. file. And as we are speaking, and this could change, Donald Trump has signed an executive order pausing the tariffs he threatened on Canada until at least April 2nd, though there's a component of the Canadian economy that they say is not compliant with our trade arrangement that will be hit with tariffs. We don't know where that's going to go. Melanie Joly called this a psychodrama the other day. What's your thoughts on where we are right now in this trade battle with the United States?
Oh, I mean, look, this is absolutely absurd what is going on right now. You don't treat your friend, your neighbor, your ally like this. I'm not sure that Donald Trump knows exactly where he's going with this either. And I know that for both American and Canadian businesses and American and Canadian people, like, this is enough. I mean, this is so much drama, anxiety, stress in the markets. I mean, we saw how the U.S. Stock Exchange responded when these threats were imposed. And this is causing so much anxiety on both sides of the border that is completely unnecessary. We have a trade agreement with the United States that we have signed. We should follow those rules. And let me be perfectly clear for Canadians, you know, under my leadership and what I will continue to do as a member of this government and a leader in this country, that, you know, our economy and our jobs and our way of life is not up for negotiation. But I think we have to be perfectly clear with the president. It's not enough to, you know, suspend these tariffs until April 2nd. They need to be completely off the table. And until such a time, Canada needs to respond strongly. You know, I saw Premier Ford is going to impose additional export tariffs on electricity. That's a good start, but we should be talking about potash. We should be talking about car parts. We should be talking about things that really demonstrate to the United States that, you know, we're not afraid to stand up for our economy and for our jobs, but like, enough is enough. Like, it is time to stop this yo-yo. It's not good for anyone, and it's only going to create uncertainty in the markets, uncertainty for businesses, uncertainty for workers, and make life more expensive for people on both sides of the border.
Things like fertilizer and energy are things you can stop, but because they cross the border one time and are sold to a customer. Auto parts go back and forth across a bunch of times, and anything that limits that could lead to the entire shutdown of the sector in Canada, the U.S. and in Mexico. Are you prepared to do that? Because this is what Flavio Volpe and Brian Kingston and others said we must avoid at all costs, because everybody loses their jobs in that case.
Well, look, the United States need to understand how much they depend on Canada. And what President Trump said is that we don't need any of this stuff from Canada. We don't rely on you. Well, the auto industry on both sides of the border is symbiotic. It is intertwined, and it relies on production in both the United States and in Canada. And so we need to make that message very clear. And I mean, we heard from the big three. That's why, you know, they apparently went to the White House and called on President Trump to suspend the tariffs there. But let's talk about fertilizer and potash. I mean, the United States imports 90% of their potash, which they use as fertilizer in the Corn Belt, to grow food in the United States. Right. Like, they can't grow food without Canadian potash. And so even if we put additional export tariffs on that, that would significantly increase the cost. Or if they're doing this, you know, maybe we should consider holding it back, because saying, like, just stop this nonsense, you know, it is completely inappropriate, unnecessary, unjustified, and to really show Donald Trump that, you know, we're not going to back down, and we're going to hit back hard if that's what we need to do. But this constant, you know, dragging it out, playing like this is really hurting both of our economies.
Look, I've gone out of time, but just, I get it with a commodity and a natural resource that you control on this side of the border. But if you do it in the auto sector, as you've suggested here, the push from the Trump administration is to have all of that relocate inside the United States. So if there's an escalation there, and the auto companies, which are largely headquartered not in Canada, they have operations here, if they see that, aren't you just incentivizing them to move to the United States?
Well, you can't relocate that production in a couple of days. I mean,
no, but they would make plans over a year. There are production lines that are on hold and expansions that are on hold because of this uncertainty. It maybe has a galloping effect to the south of the border.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I'm not going to do anything that is going to purposefully hurt the Canadian economy, but I think we have to be very clear with the Americans that this action is inappropriate, and it is something that is hurting both of us, but that as Canadians, we're willing to put everything on the line to protect our jobs and protect our economy. And this is something that I think we have to be just, you know, very clear-eyed and strong on, because, you know, if we give in one sector and not in another, that just means that we're opening up ourselves for, you know, being exploited by the United States. And I think as Canadians, that is just simply something that we should not be negotiating.
Okay, well, Karina Gould, if you win on Sunday, whoever wins on Sunday is going to have to deal with this, I think, is priority number one. Thank you for being here today. We appreciate it. That's Liberal leadership candidate Karina Gould.
Thank you, David.
And the Liberal leadership contest to determine Prime Minister Trudeau's successor takes place this Sunday. I'll be here with Chief Political Correspondent Rosemary Barton. It all starts at 4 p.m. for our special coverage, and you can watch that on CBC News Network and everywhere you stream CBC News. All right, it's time now for our daily power rankings, our look at who is up and who is down on Canada's political stage today. I am joined by Rachel Siegel, a former director of policy in the Stephen Harper government and a co-host of the Beyond the Ballot podcast. Leah Ward is a former director of communications for former Alberta NDP Premier Rachel Notley. And here with me in the studio today, Jonathan Kalis, a former Quebec advisor to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. It is good to see you all. Jono, it's great to have you here in the flesh. All right, let's get to the quote of the day. We never had a commercial break, so we can get to tease it. Here's the quote. If you want to be a numbskull like Justin Trudeau and say, oh, we're going to do this, then tariffs are going to go up. Leah, who do you think said that? It wasn't Jono. I'll let you know that. He would never call his former boss a numbskull.
Could it be Rachel?
Possibly. That would be an interesting twist. All right, Rachel Siegel is Leah's pick, or do you want to make a guess?
No,
or
that's my best
Okay,
guess.
all right. Rachel, your thoughts?
I'm so flattered to be somebody's pick. I'm going to go with, I don't know, Donald Trump seems to be talking about Justin Trudeau a lot, so I'll go with him.
He sure does. Jonathan, what's your guess?
I was going to guess Peter Navarro, but he would have been even meaner. I'm going to go with Bessent.
Bessent. Okay, it's not quite mean enough for Navarro. All right, here we go. Let's play the clip.
I think we have to be open to the idea, if you want to be a numbskull like Justin Trudeau and say, oh, we're going to do this, then tariffs are going to go up. But if you want to sit back, have a discussion with the Commerce Department, USTR, they all have my phone number too. I am happy to have a discussion with our foreign counterparts that says that here's what we think you were doing. And the tariffs are the actual easy part.
Okay, Jonathan, you were right. That was the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and he makes it sound so simple. If you just sit back and have a conversation with us, this can all go away. I guess they did, because there is this pause until the 2nd of April. I mean, what do you make of what's happened and what the Treasury Secretary had to say there?
I think, we've been hearing this for a long time. Don't pay attention to the rhetoric. Figure out what's going to happen in the room. The room could be in the phone call. It could be the conversation. It could have been in Mar-a-Lago. It could have been Dominic LeBlanc talking with Bessent, or with, Lutnick, who they seem to talk 3 times a day. Or it can be with Donald Trump and Justin Trudeau with colorful language, with whatever is going on back and forth. But they get it done because they're the ones in the room having the conversation, and that conversation is not actually public, and that's where things get done.
Yeah, Rachel, I have to pause every once in a while because I feel like I'm living in like a version of Mad Libs where the Treasury Secretary is calling the Prime Minister a numbskull, and we're learning about the President using profanity in an argument over Canadian dairy. And I feel like I'm in a weird dream. Anyway, your thoughts on what we just heard there?
I think most Canadians feel like we're in a weird dream, but I think a lot of us are really, thinking about the small business owners in this country and really worried about the economy. And so it's one thing to be, swearing in a meeting, but it's another thing to actually see the impact that this is having on our economy. And while we celebrated a pause a few weeks ago, I think today Canadians are taking it not as lightly. It's not a celebration of this pause. It's okay, well, where do we go from here? What's going to happen a month from now? And the fact that this is almost worse because the United States has our economy chained to whatever decision the president makes. So when we talk about Canada specifically, it's interesting to me, though, that both Trump and members of his administration are starting to really craft the message around Justin Trudeau and this being Trudeau's fault, and kind of hone in a little bit more on Canadian politics than we've seen previous administrations, including Trump's first administration. So what's the strategy behind that? I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, he's demonstrating a very poor understanding of our political system by suggesting Justin Trudeau is using this to stay on when the guy's gone in a week. I mean, we've seen him taking stuff out of the office. But Leah, They can blame Justin Trudeau all they want. I mean, they're hitting Mexico, China, Europe, everybody, right? I mean, Trump is the problem here. But what do you make of where things are with this pause?
Oh, I mean, I'm going to have to agree with Rachel. I think seeing this pause come again, not entirely unexpected. I think after the last one, it became clear that once there's a reaction in the stock market, once businesses start complaining directly to the Trump administration, to Trump himself, that he finds a way of backing down, and they come up with all kinds of rhetorical reasons for why that's the case. Some type of big win, some type of concession, someone's stupid, and so they try and save face a bit. But it's not entirely unexpected, but I think even just building on Rachel's point, the anxiety and the fear right now is not abated in the way that perhaps people were sort of tempted to take a sigh of relief the last time, because this type of chaos and uncertainty is arguably worse.
Yeah, and that's precisely why all the premiers are going ahead with the retaliation, and the first $30 billion is not coming off because they're sick of what Melanie Joly called the psychodrama of this every 30 days, right? So we'll see where we are.
Justin Trudeau called it Thursday.
Yeah, he did, which I thought was a very funny line. So Jonathan, this brings us to your pick, because you do want to talk about the legacy of your former boss.
I think we'll have the next week, whenever it is that he reaches his final day. I think he's going out on a high. I think his speech, even going back to early February before the first pause, his speech on Tuesday morning, I think his handling of Trump, not letting Trump's baiting of him, whether it's calling him governor or, yes, he's responded on the 51st state, but he hasn't let it get him off his objective, which is to get the tariffs taken off, to move on from this, and to do basically whatever he can to come up with the least bad situation for Canada. And that will be his sort of final parting shot. And you sort of see that fire in his belly. Maybe he's giving it his last bit of energy, but he's going out sort of all in. And that, his legacy in terms of other policies, whether it's what he did for the pension plan and what repercussions, positive repercussions it'll have for the next generations, or on today, pharmacare, or on childcare, or on many other things, those things we'll look back in time and figure out which ones have had lasting effects.
Right.
But right now, the last image people will have of him as prime minister is this past week, and what he's able to, get us through the beginning of this storm. There's still way more of the storm to go, of course.
Rachel, it's kind of a government that's been at its best in times of crisis, right? In terms of their political function, like during, Trump 1, Trump 2, COVID, and that they've shown a focus and discipline they didn't show when they weren't in the middle of a political crisis. Like, they're very good at cramming for final exams, but not always doing the coursework throughout the semester, is the way I've described it. But, what's your sense of where things are as the Prime Minister enters his final week?
Well, I think it's very easy to give it your all when you have one foot out the door. I will give it to Trudeau. He did a great press conference the other day, but it's very easy to stand in front of a camera and show how serious you are about these tariffs and really go at Donald Trump when a week from now, nothing is your responsibility. You're handing this off to the next leader. I think for me, what this signals, and I always go back to the federal election date, but is this really going to build up support for the Liberals in his last week? In which case, that will reposition the Liberal campaign to start thinking about moving the election sooner and sooner. And so I wonder if this really good week that he's had will actually change their planning on when to go to the polls. But ultimately, I think what will come out as Justin Trudeau's legacy is a lot of ups and a lot of downs. But I'm not sure that Canadians will just hold on to this last week as his true legacy. I think there's still a lot of feelings out there about Justin Trudeau.
Oh, there's no question about that. After 9 years, you're going to have a very mixed response. But, Leah, I wonder, he is 1 foot out the door, but this is not how most people do in their last week on the job, right? It has been a pretty fierce agenda with a lot of consequential choices.
Yeah, you almost have to wonder if it's a bit of a dynamic of, like you can pick on your sibling and rough them around, but as soon as someone else, a bully in the schoolyard comes along, then all of a sudden, you're standing at their defense. And I wonder if that's a little bit of what's happening in the country right now, that because of the threats that we're facing from Trump in the United States, that people are feeling a bit protective even of Justin Trudeau. I mean, I think, looking at his overall legacy, it's probably too soon to fully define how that will be remembered by Canadians. I mean, some of the biggest programs that Liberals will tout, of course, you'll hear me say, were NDP driven and wouldn't have happened without pressure from Jagmeet Singh and the NDP. And up until recently, his legacy was going to be defined by his own hubris and his unwillingness to step aside in the face of an election that was, setting up to decimate his party. And so, this is a nicer exit for him, and I think that's probably comforting for someone who's given 10 years of their life to service. How it will be remembered, I think, is still a big question mark.
Okay, yeah, look, it's been interesting how the Trump stuff has just kind of squeezed this big transition for the country, out of the conversation in a big way, because, the immediate stakes every day are just, they're so high and it's so chaotic. But Rachel, you want to talk about how BC is responding to this moment in time and what we've seen from David Eby and his government in their budget.
Yeah, so Tuesday was budget day. And the thing that stood out to me, and it was something that the Conservative critic for finance pointed out as well in his budget response, was that in the contingency planning for the province of British Columbia talked about tariff planning and yet put forward a $4 billion contingency. But in estimates 6 months before had already outlined a $3.8 billion contingency fund. You have to remember, the contingency includes things like our fire prevention and firefighting amounts. And so that is a really small amount of money. The one thing they also didn't do is highlight at that time what British Columbia was planning to do in order to counter those tariffs. Today, Premier Eby came out and he outlined his plan of what he eventually will be doing. But the thing is, British Columbians are waiting for him to act quickly. This is a ever-changing situation. And so it would have been nice to have the Premier, the Finance Minister come out and say, we are allocating this specific amount of money to the tariff challenge. This is our program, and this is when it's going to be implemented. But even today, we didn't get really dates on when those programs will come in. So I think that was a down for me. I wanted to see more leadership from the NDP and a better budgeting system with regards to fighting off these tariffs.
Rachel, I will confess the BC budget flew under the radar on Tuesday for a whole bunch of reasons. So I have a question.
Not for me.
No, I get it. But is the lack of program clarity because they don't have program clarity, or because, like everybody, they just don't know what is going to happen? So how do you spell it out in granular detail? What's the reason? Help me understand that.
Well, for context, we watched the budgets come out in other provinces with specific programs being announced. We didn't see any of that in the BC budget. And so was that because they didn't know what was going to happen? I doubt it. I think that there was still planning going underway, but I'll leave that to Leah to really answer from the NDP side.
Well, Leah, as a New Democrat who also happens to be in British Columbia today, maybe you can enlighten us on this lack of clarity that exists.
I'm just so excited that Rachel agrees that a $4 billion contingency that doesn't account for wildfires and other emergencies.
I knew you were
like
going
agriculture
there.
emergencies. Oh wait, I'm talking about Alberta that did the exact same thing, except that in Alberta they cut healthcare, they cut education, and they didn't have anything that spoke to workforce, project approvals, any type of economic diversification, all things that we actually did see from the BC government. I think, Eby has been pretty clear and pretty upfront about diversification, about retaliatory measures, and about his plans for protecting the economy, and that showed up in the budget. It showed up before the budget, and then of course we're hearing more about it today. So I love this one for Rachel.
Okay, we got about 4 minutes left, so I just want to get to Jono here and then get through Leah's pick. Jono, I don't know if you're going to see a lot of clarity in all the provinces. I don't know, because there's a COVID-like feel to some of this, not in scale, but in the uncertainty, and it might end up being the federal government that steps in on some things, depending on how bad it gets, I guess.
I mean, the Quebec budget's now been announced it'll be on March 25th, so we're less than 3 weeks away, and so I have some of those questions as well. What would have been in this budget had there not been the tariff? Like, what was taken out or what was added? Doesn't seem like much was added, but what was taken out? You know, you're running a historic deficit. They're planning for debt to GDP ratio to go from about 23% to 34%. That's massive. So,
yes, 10.9 billion, I think, is like $11 billion.
Yeah, so that's pretty big. So, you know, what exactly are they going to do if, you know, they're still planning for 0.3% growth. That's barely any, but what if the economy shrinks, and then what happens? It's some big questions.
Yeah, it's not a good time to be in government right now with Donald Trump doing what he's doing. But Leah, you do have an up about the BC government and the federal Liberal government, and it's about pharmacare.
Yeah, look, you know, everyone's eyes and attention are on Trump and tariffs and the Liberal leadership race. And I think it's worth celebrating these pharmacare deals, both, you know, Manitoba and BC today, for what they offer people in the sort of as the dust settles, if and when it ever does. But in the coming months, the experience of Canadians is going to move from fear and anxiety to the real effects of these threats. That means higher costs for everyday goods, groceries, medical equipment. People are already feeling an affordability crisis. They're going to feel it even more. And a program like this, you know, it being in place now is going to help people as those costs increase. And just finally, quickly, I think in the face of an attack against our sovereignty and our sense of being Canadian, strengthening healthcare is such a powerful message to the United States about who we are and the kinds of things that we care about and invest in. And I think that's a really exciting thing to celebrate right now.
So Rachel, 2 provincial NDP governments securing deals on a program that Leo would tell you was the consequence of efforts by the federal NDP, but signing that deal with the federal Liberal health minister, who is undoubtedly going to use this as a wedge against the federal Conservatives in the upcoming election, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see him out here today signing that. That was definitely an interesting, just at this moment in time, to see a Liberal minister signing that with an NDP government out here. But I will say, obviously, nobody should ever have to decide between feeding themselves and having medication. And good on the NDP government for getting this through, especially their agreement with the feds. The thing is, we need to zoom out. We are in an affordability crisis. The NDP government in this province needs to start addressing some of the core causes of this affordability crisis and stop focusing on Band-Aid solutions all over the place. I will mention in that budget on Tuesday, another $1 million for the Premier's office for him to hire staff. That could have gone to bigger priorities for British Columbia. So I think it's a win on one hand, but I also think there needs to be a greater look at what BC actually needs.
Well, that $1 million could have bought you a 1-bedroom condo maybe in Vancouver as well. Jonathan, we got about 45 seconds left. It seems to, no, I'm joking. They're locking down programs before the election too.
Well, but we always complain that the Liberals were not addressing the affordability issue. And their answer always was, well, we're doing childcare and we're doing dental care and we're doing pharmacare. Well, those are things that when we pass an election, is Pierre Poilievre going to cut those? Those are things that are going to make a big difference in people's pockets. They make a difference. You can concretely feel it. Now that they're being implemented, it's going to be hard to roll them back.
We saw a mother in Manitoba that this will save her $15,000 a year in what she spends on her kid who's diabetic. So like it's going to be interesting to see politically how that plays out now that it's not theoretical, at least at this moment in a couple of provinces, though I don't think it kicks in until June in Manitoba, maybe around then in BC. Okay, we got 20 seconds left. Got to say goodbye. Rachel Siegel, Leah Ward, Jonathan Kalis, thank you so much. And thank you all for watching. I'm David Cochran. This has been Power in Politics. We're going to be back in 22 hours. Up next, it's Hannah Mansing Tonight, right here on CBC News Network. We'll see you tomorrow.